Hello everyone, welcome to Frightening Tales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax and dive into tonight's case. Story 1. Jealousy can be a dangerous thing and sometimes it turns deadly in fact. Studies show that nearly 40% of murders are fueled by jealousy. It can come from a partner, a friend, family, or even a stranger. But what happens when the people closest to you reveal their darkest sides? For 14-year-old Amelia Sjöberg from Sweden, this nightmare became all too real after getting permission for what was supposed to be a fun pajama party. She was lured to an industrial site and brutally murdered. The most disturbing part: the attack was filmed and shared online by her own so-called friends. What could drive such young girls to commit such a horrific act? By the end of this video you might start to wonder how well you really know the people you trust. Let's get started. Before we dive into the tragic events, let's take a closer look at who Amelia Sjöberg really was. At just 14 years old, Amelia was a bright and hopeful girl from Landskrona, southern Sweden. Despite her young age, she had a maturity and resilience that shined through, but her upbringing wasn't easy. She was placed in foster care at a young age, and like any child in that situation, Amelia longed for a real family, a place where she felt safe and loved. It was a dream her mother, Anna Sjöberg, worked tirelessly to make come true, even though their lives were far from simple. Anna, who became a mother at 19, did everything she could to give Amelia the stable, loving home she never had. Growing up, Anna had experienced her own struggles as a child, and she was determined to create a better life for her daughter. Amelia didn't let her tough background hold her back, though she was full of life and energy, especially when it came to social media. TikTok in particular was where she expressed herself. Her videos were filled with creativity, spreading messages of friendship, kindness and support. She connected with people from all over the world, sharing her youthful spirit. But Amelia wasn't the only one who loved to share her life with the world. Her mother, Anna, was just as proud and eager to celebrate her daughter's beauty and spirit. One example of this was when Anna posted a video of Amelia's 13th birthday, capturing the special moments and showcasing just how much she adored her daughter. In an interview, her mother also remembers Amelia's kindness, like when she was just 2 years old and decided to send her pacifiers to children in Africa. Even at such a young age, she had a heart full of compassion. But of course, like any teenager, Amelia had her fair share of challenges, especially when it came to her social life. Reports from local media and police suggest that she had a falling out with others at a youth home she once stayed at, which may have played a role in the events that followed. Though the details of what happened aren't entirely clear, what we do know is that Amelia remained optimistic, always looking forward to the little things that brought her joy. One of those things was the pajama party. She was so excited about attending a party that heartbreakingly she never made it to. According to her mother, Amelia asked for permission to attend a pajama party on July 21st of 2024. Excited for a fun night, she set out with what she thought were her friends, but instead of heading to a sleepover, two of these friends lured her to a remote industrial area near the Landskrona railway station, pretending it was part of the party plans. After all, they were her friends. What could possibly go wrong? Unfortunately, Amelia had no idea that her friends had a dark and sinister plan. Documents from the local court indicate that Amelia was likely killed sometime between July 21st and July 22nd. Her body was discovered shortly after midnight on Tuesday, July 23rd, and after Amelia was discovered, she was immediately rushed to the hospital in a desperate attempt to save her life. Doctors and medical staff fought hard to keep her alive, but despite their best efforts, her injuries were too severe. Tragically, Amelia succumbed to her wounds and was Pronounced dead not long after arriving. The condition of her body made it clear this was no random accident. Chief Investigator Camp Pearson reported that Amelia's body displayed signs of severe violence. Although the exact cause of death was initially withheld, it was later revealed that she had multiple stab wounds on her neck. Shockingly, silver tape had also been found, suggesting that Amelia had been physically restrained during the attack. Prosecutor Thomas Alvear noted that the injuries and circumstances strongly suggest that Amelia's life was taken intentionally and she was deprived of her freedom before her death. What makes this case even more disturbing is that the two girls who committed this horrifying act were minors themselves, just 13 and 15 years old. Their actions are nothing short of chilling, and it's almost impossible to think how such young individuals could be involved in something so brutal. Initially, many people on social media believed that Amelia's murder was racially motivated. However, both the media and the police have stayed silent about the possible motives behind the crime, waiting for the investigation to reveal more details. What investigators couldn't ignore, though, was the speed at which recordings of the incident began to spread online, forcing them to act quickly. The video itself is truly horrifying. The fact that the two girls not only had the time but the presence of mind to record the brutal act is unbelievable. However, these recordings have played a crucial role in identifying the perpetrators. It became clear from the footage that the crime was most likely committed by two teenagers who had posed as Amelia's friends. According to reports from Swedish media, Amelia had a confrontation with one of the girls just before her death. Shortly after, the 13 and 15-year-old girls fatally wounded her. Interestingly, after the crime, these teenagers reportedly bragged about what they had done in a group chat. They even shared the horrifying recordings of the attack. These videos will undoubtedly serve as key evidence in the case, directly incriminating the young girls involved. And when the two were arrested, one of the girls reportedly admitted to her role in the crime. The prosecutor mentioned that this girl provided details about what led to the tragic incident. Her lawyer even confirmed that her client had spoken to the police, and both girls made certain admissions during the investigation. As for the motive, it appears the brutal murder stemmed from something as petty as a fight over an insult. Swedish newspaper Expressen reports that the dispute escalated over jealousy, and this was backed up by Amelia's mother, who also claimed that her daughter was killed because of a boy. One of the suspects told police that they never intended to kill Amelia and that things just got out of hand. However, the Swedish media also uncovered disturbing evidence suggesting the girls had prepared for the attack. They reportedly stole silver tape and a knife from local stores, indicating that the encounter might have been more premeditated than the suspects initially claimed. The 15-year-old, who was the first to be arrested, had been staying in the same youth home where Amelia lived before the attack. She remains in custody, while the younger girl, aged 13, has been placed in the care of social services. In the days following the murder, local police and the Coast Guard searched the harbor near the industrial site where Amelia's body was found 2 days before. A bag containing her bank cards and other belongings was discovered in the water, but the authorities haven't revealed what they were searching for during the harbor investigation. Later that day, Chief Investigator Pearson shared that police had discovered a knife near the crime scene, which they suspect could be the murder weapon. A second knife was also found and taken as evidence, though authorities haven't confirmed the exact weapon used in Amelia's death. This case is still developing, and it's clear there's a lot more to come as new details emerge. When it comes to the suspects, everyone in the community is hoping they'll be tried as adults. What they did is so brutal that it's hard to believe even an adult could commit such a crime. Sadly, cases like this aren't isolated. In recent years, there's been an alarming rise in young people being involved in serious crimes. Sometimes the cause is something as small as jealousy. One of the most heartbreaking cases similar to this is that of 13-year-old Tristan Bailey, who was murdered by her Classmate, a classmate she likely trusted just like Amelia. Tristan had her whole life ahead of her. She was a bright young cheerleader full of energy and potential, but that was all tragically cut short in May 2021. Tristan was brutally stabbed and slashed multiple times. Aiden Fucci, who was only 14 at the time, was arrested for her murder. This case shook the nation, not just for the horror of the crime but because both the victim and the perpetrator were so young. Fucci, who lived near Tristan and went to the same school, was known to talk about killing people. His friends said he once planned to drag someone into the woods and stab them. While Fucci didn't have a criminal record, his disturbing behavior was noticed by others. On the night Tristan died, Fucci reportedly convinced her to leave her house and meet him. They were seen on a video walking together near where her body was later found. A little over an hour later, Fucci was seen walking back alone with his shoes in his hands. Tristan's autopsy revealed she had been stabbed 114 times, with 49 of those being defensive wounds, showing how hard she fought back. It's heartbreaking, especially considering how young she was and how much life she had ahead of her. And while Tristan was still missing, Aiden Fucci posted a selfie on Snapchat from me of a police car holding up a peace sign with the message, "Hey guys, has anybody seen Tristan lately?" Someone even replied, "You were with her, Aiden." You know what happened as the investigation went on. A buck knife with a broken tip was found in a pond near Tristan's body. That missing tip was lodged in her scalp and the knife was identified as Fucci's. There was video and DNA evidence along with blood-stained clothes and shoes found at his house. Investigators even found a knife sheath and a notebook filled with violent drawings. What makes things worse is how some parents failed to step up instead of helping police. Fucci's own mother, Crystal Lane Smith, was caught on video trying to clean a pair of bloody jeans after the murder. The next day, in a recorded room at the police station, she asked Fucci if he was sure there was nothing on his clothes from the night before. When he said, "I don't think so." "Why?" she whispered. Blood. Crystal Smith was arrested for tampering with evidence, which just shows how deep this tragedy goes. It's a chilling example of how misguided actions can make an already horrific situation even worse. The rise in teen violence, especially crimes as brutal as this, is hard to wrap our heads around. We often search for reasons, but beyond individual motives there's a bigger question: what's happening with young people today? Why are we seeing more and more teens desensitized to such extreme violence? It's something we urgently need to understand and address. In a recent interview, Matt Henson, the attorney who represented the Bailey family, took a deep dive into the chilling similarities between Amelia's case and the Tristan Bailey case. He pointed out a troubling trend we're seeing not just in the US but globally: an increase in violent acts committed by young people. Henson talked about how often young perpetrators aren't sophisticated enough to cover up their crimes. They tend to be caught quickly because they lack the experience and maturity to evade detection. In most cases they're arrested and face prosecution unless they strike some sort of deal. This is especially true for minors whose brains aren't fully developed, making it hard for them to plan out a complex crime. He emphasized that while understanding their motives is crucial, proving who did it is usually straightforward because these youths often leave clear evidence of their actions. The key issue, he argues, is not just the crime itself but what drives these young people to commit such heinous acts. It seems many of them don't fully grasp the consequences of their actions or the punishments they might face. This misunderstanding might lead them to believe they can get away with it. These children, it appears, don't quite understand or comprehend or able to get the idea that there's a punishment behind this. I think a lot of times they think they're going to get away with it. They plan it out, they think they're going to. He also mentioned the sloppiness often seen in these cases. For instance, in Amelia's case, investigators found a knife near the crime scene and a bag with Amelia's belongings in the water, indicating a poorly executed attempt to dispose of evidence. Sometimes Minors get help from adults, and there's a report that an adult is being questioned in connection with this case. While it's not clear what role this adult might have played, Henson pointed out that adults often get involved, either by assisting or by trying to cover up the crime, as seen in Tristan Bailey's case with Aidan Fucci. He also drew a comparison to the Slender Man stabbing case from about a decade ago. In May 2014, two 12-year-olds Anissa W.Y. and Morgan Geyser lured their friend Tin Lutner into the woods after a sleepover. Geyser then stabbed Lutner 19 times with a knife she took from home, and the two girls left her there believing she would die. Miraculously, Lutner survived after crawling out of the woods and seeking help. Wire and Geyser later told investigators that the attack was meant to appease Slender Man, a fictional character from the internet. They believed that by committing this crime, they were preventing Slenderman Man from harming their families. This case grabbed national attention, with HBO even making a documentary called Beware the Slender Man about it in 2017. Now both girls eventually took plea deals, ending up in mental health institutions instead of traditional prison. Cases like this might explain why some teens seem so careless about committing serious crimes like murder. They might think that if they do something terrible, they'll either get a relatively short sentence, maybe 20 to 30 years in prison or in a mental hospital. To them it might seem like the consequences aren't as harsh or long-lasting as they are for adults. This kind of thinking can come from a couple of places. For one, they might see how the justice system handles young offenders and think they have a good chance of getting a lighter sentence or being treated more leniently. Plus, with their still developing brains, they might not fully grasp the seriousness of what they're doing. The idea of spending years in prison or being in a mental health facility might not seem as scary to them as it does to older, more experienced adults. Turning back to Amelia's case, it's clear that the tragedy has left her family and the entire community devastated. The heartbreak, especially for her mother Anna Skoberg, who's 33, is something that will linger for a long time. Anna has been struggling to come to terms with this unimaginable loss. She told local media, "I can't believe she's gone. Every time the phone rings, I still check to see if it's her calling. I'm in complete denial." At the time, the case was still unfolding and the family was waiting for DNA tests and dental records to officially confirm Amelia's identity, even though the police had already identified her body. Anna vividly recalls the moment when the police, accompanied by a priest, came to deliver the heartbreaking news. "I told them they couldn't tell me anything more because I've already lost my parents," she said, still grappling with disbelief. Anna can't make sense of why anyone would want to harm her daughter. She described Amelia as an angel who always stood up for others and wondered if maybe the world just wasn't ready for someone as kind as her. Before the tragedy, Amelia was feeling stressed about an upcoming pajama party. She and her mom had a small argument, but Amelia quickly sent a text apologizing. Her final message read, "Sorry mom for being difficult because I was stressed. I love you, you're my life." Anna and Amelia had recently reconnected after years apart. Just as we mentioned earlier, Amelia had been in foster care since she was 5 and they were just beginning to rebuild their lives together. They had been making plans for their new home, and Anna had even finished building a dressing table for Amelia, who was excitedly picking out new furniture for her room. She was so excited, Anna recalled, through tears. And because Amelia had been in foster care, the pajama party was meant to be her first social party. At this point, it might be time to take a closer look at your circle of friends. Sometimes it's better to go solo than to stick around with people who secretly want to see you fail or get jealous of every little win you have. Remember, genuine friends should lift you up, not drag you down. Story 2. In the music mecca that is Nashville, a young couple that seemed to have their whole life ahead of them died in a sudden, brutal attack. The circumstances of their deaths, coupled with the secret life of one of the victims, led authorities through a winding journey to uncover the truth. This is the story of William Lanway and Holly Williams and the millionaire that orchestrated their demise with the help of former military personnel. Why did this millionaire want them dead, and how did he get former Marines to do the deed? Bill Lanway and Holly Williams were 36 and 33 years old respectively at the time of their deaths. At first glance, you'd think that Williams was the more well-adjusted of the two. She grew up in a happy home in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, with her family describing her as a sweet, trusting person who only wanted to help others. The fact that Williams had Kardashian-level good looks certainly worked in her favor as well. The combination of inner and outer beauty made her seem destined for greatness, and when she decided to pursue a career as a medical esthetician, it was only a matter of time before she'd make it big. Laneway, on the other hand, had a much more troubled upbringing than his partner. He was ravaged by trauma that was etched deep into his psyche by the man that should have acted as his role model, his father. When he was just a child, Laneway's father aimed a gun at his head and threatened to pull the trigger. This alone would have been enough to require a lifetime of therapy, but things would only get worse from there. A week after this incident, Lane's father brutally stabbed his mother to death. He then went to prison, effectively turning Laneway into an orphan. Despite all of this, Laneway appeared to move past his inner wound. He got married and had a daughter that became the light of his life, but even this happiness wouldn't last for long. Laneway ended up losing his daughter to brain cancer when she was just 5 years old. This event seemed to sap the life right out of him. Laneway only showed signs of joy when he was out drinking with his friends. He was in this terrible mental health spiral during his early 30s when he met Holly Williams, and the two immediately hit it off. However, Williams had taken a dark path in life. Though she earned decent money as an esthetician, she supplemented this income by working as an escort under the pseudonym Leela Love. This secret life would become the catalyst for the couple's demise. The two troubled lovers had a chaotic relationship, to say the least. Friends and acquaintances say that they often fought only to make up and get back together again, as if nothing had happened during their on and off relationship. Laneway showed signs that he'd inherited his father's stormy temper, according to police reports. Williams had called 911 on her boyfriend at least 3 times in the year before the incident. Laneway's abusive behavior was so bad that it led to Williams installing security cameras around the premises. Despite this, the pair seemed to be on the same page about one thing: earning money. There's a chance that Laneway knew his girlfriend moonlighted as a sex worker, or perhaps he found out later and wanted to take the chance to cash in. Regardless, on February 3, 2020, Williams received a text from someone that would completely change the course of her life. At this point, it's important to introduce an individual that's central to the entire dark saga. Austin-based millionaire Eric Mond came from money with his grandfather Charles, starting the wildly successful Mond Automobile Group in 1957. Mond took over the family business when he came of age, taking it to even greater heights. His flourishing business allowed him to buy a lavish 10-bedroom mansion worth $5 million with the Austin Country Club golf course quite literally serving as his backyard. However, it appears that Mond had an insatiable sexual appetite that his wife simply couldn't satisfy. In early 2020, Mond headed over to Nashville to visit his son at college. It was here that he came across an ad for one Leela Love. Smitten by her supermodel good looks, Mond couldn't resist sending her a text. On February 3, they quickly agreed to meet at a hotel, with Mond going by the alias Eric Moore to cover up his tracks. Neither of them realized that they'd set a sequence of events into motion that would have catastrophic results. On March 1, 2020, Mond received a chilling message from an unknown number. The sender apparently knew that the millionaire had hooked up with Williams and threatened to expose the affair to his wife. Man still only knew his escort by the name Leela Love, and he had no idea who the text might be coming from. All he knew was that the sender wanted $25,000, otherwise he'd bring his life crashing down. As it turns out, the sender was none other than William Laneway, who'd found man's number while he was going through his girlfriend's phone. Police haven't clarified whether Williams was in on the plot, so there's a chance that Laneway was doing this. Without her knowledge either way, Laneway was never going to get the money for someone like Mond giving into blackmail. Just isn't on the cards. The millionaire must have thought that sending the money would only expose him to further extortion down the line, so he decided to take matters into his own hands in the darkest way possible. As the owner of a successful auto dealership, Mand was familiar with several private security personnel in the Austin area, including an Israeli national by the name of Gilad Pel, a former member of the Israeli Defense Force. Peled was well known for providing security to high celebrities including Charlie Sheen. His company Spirup Security Group also provided security to luxury jewelry dealers and other high-end stores in the area. Peld had often worked for Mond in the past, usually helping the auto dealership owner clear homeless people out of his lot, but this time around the millionaire had a very different request for the security firm owner. He wanted Peld to look into the threatening text and find out who it was from, and on March 5th he paid him $15,000 to get the investigation going. With this retainer fee, Peled enlisted the services of Brian Brockway and Adam Carey, two former Marines. After a career in special ops, they transitioned into a career in private security. After returning to civilian life, Brockway asked his brother Chad, who owned a security firm of his own, to help draft an intelligence report. This situation report, or SITRUP for short, became the basis of what was to come. The former Marines created a pinger account to securely exchange messages and began spying on their victims. In the meantime, Laneway and Williams had no idea that these highly trained and deadly individuals had started hunting them down. On March 10, Williams' outdoor security cameras captured a heavily muscled man with a long beard knocking on her door. Internal cameras recorded Williams pacing anxiously while the man was outside. He asked her to open the door, and fearing for her life, Williams tried barricading the door with a rod-like object outside. The unknown individual told Williams that he just wanted to ask her a couple of questions. Terrified by the man's presence, Williams continued to pace in silence. One has to wonder what might have happened if Williams had opened the door that day. Would the events of the next 2 days have played out differently? We'll never know. With that said, it's possible that Laneway found out about the surprise visit because he tried to take the fight to Mond the very next day. On March 11, Laneway took things up a notch by calling Mand at his home. His goal was to scare the millionaire into paying up, but the fear he instilled had an unintended reaction. When the call came through, Mond was outright terrified. He couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if his wife had picked up the phone. Would Laneway have revealed everything to her, or would he have threatened her in some way? His mind started spiraling. If Laneway knew his home phone number, did he also know his address? This meant that he might decide to pay a visit, something that could only lead to a disastrous outcome. Man knew that he had to act. Simply knowing who his blackmailer was wouldn't cut it. He needed to take Laneway out of the picture, and Williams too, while he was at it. It seemed like the only way to tie up all the loose ends, but there was no chance that he'd pull the trigger himself. Luckily for him, and unluckily for the doomed couple, Brockway offered to do the unthinkable, take both their lives for $60,000 each. Mond heard the offer and accepted, and the plan was set into motion at about 11:40 p.m. on March 12. Williams and Laneway were recorded exiting their home. This was the last time either of them was seen alive. Moments later, the security footage captured Williams screaming off camera. Her blood-curdling shrieks indicated that she was being viciously attacked, and sure enough, photo evidence revealed by the police showed that she had several bruises from the assault. The assailants, who were later revealed to be Carey Brockway and a third unknown gunman, didn't waste any time ending Laneway's life though. While they beat Williams up, they riddled Laneway's body with bullets, and he died on the spot. Williams watched as her boyfriend was brutally slain, helpless in the face of three large men that she had no chance of overpowering. Her screams continued, turning into spine-tingling shrieks as she lay on the ground. Shortly after, one of the assailants repositioned the security camera, pointing it towards the ground. No one knows exactly what happened over the next hour and a half. All we can say for certain is that Williams was stuffed into the trunk of a white Honda Acura with her boyfriend's lifeless body, after which the assailants drove to a nearby construction site. While there, they finished the job by shooting Williams to death. The empty construction site likely rang out with her screams, but no one was nearby to hear it. Based on the security footage from outside her home, Williams seemed to be begging the assailants to stop. It's possible that she continued to plead until the very end, but her attackers showed no mercy once the deed was done. All that was left was to dispose of the bodies, but the assailants didn't really have a plan for that. They could have dumped the bodies anywhere, but instead they placed them in the car and sent it speeding into a tree. The hurtling Acura was spotted by a construction worker who happened to be nearby. When he approached the car and saw the bullet-riddled bodies inside, he immediately called 911. By this point, the assailants were nowhere to be found. Police arrived on the scene, cordoned it off, and began investigating the deadly crime. It would take them over a year to find any leads, during which time Mand would face a few unforeseen setbacks of his own. Not long after the shooting, the assailants deleted the Pinger account and started covering up their tracks. Grateful for the successful execution, Mond would eventually transfer hundreds of thousands of dollars to Palad's company account. He assumed that life would go back to normal. He was wrong. Brockway had hired the third gunman to help carry out the hit, which turned out to be a huge mistake. The details are murky, but this unnamed gunman somehow found out that Eric Mond was their client. This individual was desperate enough for money that he helped end 2 lives, so he was going to take any opportunity to cash in. Once he learned about Mand, he decided to extort his former client for even more money. This led to a phone call between Pelid and Mand that would prove crucial in bringing them down. Yeah, can you hear me? I can't hear you. With all the cars, I'm here. Okay, you ready yet? Are you by yourself? Yeah, okay. We have a problem with one. I'm on signal, so we've got to talk because it's a day I got to take care of this. We've got a problem with one of the shooters in Nashville. I don't know how, but he found out that that's the other guy. That's not Brian, so he never knew of you, but he found out that you were the client that paid for this for the job, and I guess he's hurting for money, and now he wants to get paid. So I mean, he wants like $25,000. These are professional guys. I don't know how you know this thing is coming back. Usually those guys don't do stuff like that. They have a code of honor when they get a job to get a job, I guess. But yeah, but if I give 20,25, when's he going to stop? I know, but I mean, what do you want to do? I'll pay the guy 25,000, but I think it needs to go away after that, so we need to take care of him. Well, I mean, don't you think he's not going to stop? I don't know. It's not like that. That guy that you know extort you initially, that was a criminal, and this guy is, he's not threatening your family. I know you wanted to get this thing taken care of initially because he was threatening your family. This guy is just a soldier that I guess needs money. I don't think he's going to come back. Look, if you tell me he's not going to come back, I'll get the money put together. I don't care about that. He did a solid for me and I appreciate it for that, but I just want to make sure it's in 6 months down the road he's not going to pop back up. Okay. Let me talk to him. I'll try to prevent that. Hopefully, I'll talk to Brian. Maybe he can talk to him and get this gone completely where you don't have to pay the $25. Worst case scenario is that the 20 to 25 is not a big deal. I don't care about that. I don't give a __ about that, right? But I Just don't want in 3 or 4 months to get the same call again. I understand I didn't at that point. We got to take care of something that and like you said he's at that point that could backfire and completely blow back on us. Yeah, hold on, let me text Brian. Eric, yes, so Brian, we'll try to take care of this, but if this thing turning into a problem, do you want him to take care of this? Like, give me a 100. Yeah, honestly I think I'd rather take care of it permanently. Got it? Okay, well, I'll have Brian try to reason with him. I mean, my stand on these things. I don't want to get involved with this stuff, and then I'll just run 150 through spear tip like we did last time, cause it would take a long time for me to put a 100 red grand cash. I can get it probably, but it just might take me a little bit of time without what I'm saying. Got it? Alright, let me talk to Brian and see what we can do. Alright, I'm traveling back from South Texas, so if you got to call me, I'll have to pull over, which is why I just did. That's why you heard all those cars. Got it? Alright, I'll check it. So what, you're heading back home? Yeah, got it. Alright, back in Austin in a couple hours. Got it? Okay, thanks once again, man. Could have paid a smaller amount of money to end things right then, but chose instead to pay extra to have the matter resolved permanently. Brockway was never able to take out this third gunman because the authorities had already started closing in. Since this case involved suspects from multiple states, the FBI got involved in June of 2020. They didn't have any leads regarding the men in the security footage, so they started sifting through the victims' phone records instead. Eventually they found that both victims had received a call from a voice over IP number, though the VO hid the caller's identity. It also created a computer code trail for authorities to follow. This ultimately led to them identifying Adam Carey as the caller, and when they compared the picture on his driver's license to the security footage, they quickly realized that he was one of the 3 men. Another major break in the case came in early 2021 when investigators managed to recover the Tennessee sitrep that contained all the details regarding the plot. While authorities haven't mentioned how they got their hands on this document, it proved extremely useful. Piecing the conspiracy together, they learned about the homicide for hire plot, the surveillance, and the use of a security company to conduct the hit. Over the next few months, investigators began building a case. They uncovered transactions amounting to $750,000 sent from Montepil, its company account. An investigation into man's phone history showed that he texted Williams on February 5 asking her to come meet him at a bar, and then came the clincher. Authorities managed to obtain the phone call between Pilat and Mond, where the millionaire auto dealer essentially tells his hired hand to either pay off the gunman or take him out. This was the final nail in Mond and his associates' coffin. In December of 2021, all 4 participants in the double homicide were arrested. Carey was located in his North Carolina home, Brockway in San Diego, California, and Peel was apprehended right before he boarded a flight at Austin Airport. As for Mond, the mastermind behind the plot, he was arrested during a routine traffic stop, and the authorities immediately brought him in for questioning. In the footage of the interrogation, Mand appears completely unbothered by the fact that he's in handcuffs before federal agents. We don't like interviewing people with handcuffs on. Are you good with us? Yes. Okay, you're not going to be a problem or anything, are you? Yeah, I'm in or something. Yes sir. Kidding. Yes, we got some oil and pheasant. You're running pretty good. It is around. Seems like a great state. Yeah, that's right. Oh, Brett Shields, FBI. So it's before we start, especially, I'm going to read you your rights, just something we always do, and the whole purpose. 1. We're going to read you your rights. Okay, then we're going to play you some stuff, talk to you about stuff that we already know, so listen to us. You might learn a lot more from us before we even get into asking you questions. Okay, understand? Let Me start off. I'm going to give you the pen. What I do is I read you each line. I ask you to go ahead and initial beside each line. As we go down it just says that you understand it. We go from there. Okay, before we ask you your questions, you must understand your rights. You have the right to remain silent. If you understand that, go ahead and initial. There anything you say can be used against you in court. You have the right to talk to a lawyer for advice before we ask you any questions. You have the right to have a lawyer with you during question. If you cannot afford a lawyer, will be appointed before any question if you wish. And most importantly, if you decide to answer questions now without a lawyer present, you can stop answering anytime. So like I'm saying, this is to your benefit. We're going to play you some different things. We're going to tell you some of the facts that we already know about this case, okay, and then we're going to ask you your questions anytime. You can stop, okay, right there, and just sign right there, acknowledging it. Appreciated. Now Dave is our case agent, so he knows the most about this case, so he's going to present you with some of the facts that we do know. First of all, do you have any suspicion or any of you think, pardon, I have no idea? Well, would it help you if we told you that we were from Nashville, Tennessee? My son goes to school there. Okay, all right, so I've been there. Yes, so again, well, let's let me, why don't you take this time and learn from us what we have, and then we can start talking, okay? Because I think you have a story to tell, and I think it's a complicated one. I don't think I personally see things in shades of gray, not black and white. You know, I'm not the kind of guy who's like, hey, everybody who's a shoot someone who kills them is evil or anything like that. I know that things go on in your life that aren't ideal, and then sometimes you're scrambling hard to figure out how to deal with it, and then things turn out even worse, and then they turn out worse, and then the next thing you know, you're backed into a corner and there's nothing you can do. So having said that, this is why we are here, obviously. So, and I don't want you to talk because honestly I want to give you the benefit of the doubt. This is the way things work for you to be helpful to us and also to help yourself out. The more truthful you can be, the better, and this is the reason why, because as you're being truthful to us, it tells us that you're sorry for your actions. B, you have more credibility. So the more you lie to us, that's a federal violation, lying to a federal agent. So boom, on top of all these other charges you got that. But secondly, the more you lie to us, the more your credibility goes down, and then you can't help yourself out. You can't, because right now the only way you can help yourself out is to increase your credibility and be like, I was you. No, yes, I did it, but I really realized it was a mistake. I would never do it again, and I completely, this is obviously an investigation that you're aware of. It happened in Nashville. Okay, I'm not going to be able to really explain what happened other than I'm going to play you some audio because you understand, like when the murder happened, Holly had, I don't think we have to explain that part to him. This is a homicide investigation. Oh, he knows, don't worry about that. So I'm going to play this audio. I want you to understand what we're talking about here. And what you're going to hear is, this is outside Holly's apartment. Okay, this is how it went down. This is all the time she's getting shot and he's getting shot. This is someone I think you cared about. I know you cared about her because you tried to do the right thing at first, right, with Landway, and it got out of control with Landway. Landway is the guy. You tried to do the right thing, and I think it kind of got out of control. So what I'm talking about, this is a picture. And I'm not going to get into all the graphic stuff too much, although that's what a homicide sounds like, and this is what a homicide looks like, and this is what ended their misery. But if you see and hear what happened, she suffered for a long time before this happened. Okay, you see all the bruising and such around her face. She had a long day. I mean, that was the longest hour and a half of her life, literally. So this is MMPD Metro Nashville started investigating this case, and then we stepped in because they were having trouble figuring out who the people were. We were able to figure out who all of them were, and I don't even know if you want to hear all the evidence. Let's kind of cut to the chase with this. Yeah, I'm sorry, do You tell me you know who this girl is. I met her at a bar in Nashville. And how long was your relationship with her that night? And another night I came back to Nashville. So you were using her services as a prostitute, correct? Yes, okay. And now this guy right here, Landway, right? Never met him, but he found out that you screwed his girl without a condom and he started. That never happened. Well, that's why he believed. Just again, listen, wait, okay, hold on, I believe you. Go ahead. Either way, he starts trying to extort you, correct? He sent me some text messages, but he never demanded any money. Yes, he did. So let's not start. I don't remember him demanding. He might have thought that he could talk his way out of the situation, but the authorities already had a rock-solid case against him between the phone calls, text messages and wire transactions between Mond and Pell. They knew that they could put each conspirator behind bars. Even so, they tried giving Mond a chance. It's a testament to his arrogance that he refused to take it. All four culprits were charged with conspiracy to commit kidnapping resulting in death, and carrying, brandishing and discharging a firearm during and in relation to a crime of violence. Realizing how bad the situation was, Pell immediately flipped on his comrades, agreeing to testify against them in court, but in the end his involvement in the homicides was undeniable. As the court case began, 16 jurors assembled to hear arguments from both sides in a trial that lasted over 2 weeks. Court proceedings began on November 3, 2023, and unsurprisingly all of the conspirators turned on each other. Mann's lawyer claimed that his client was a victim in all of this and that Peld was the brains behind the plot. Their story was that Peld wanted to milk Mond for all he was worth, and that Mand had no idea that Williams would be kidnapped and executed. Brockway's attorney used his time to cast doubts on Pell to undermine his testimony, and that Carey was the one who suggested that they take Williams and Landway's lives. However, the jury wasn't swayed by their conflicting stories. After arguments concluded on November 17, they spent 7 hours deliberating over the evidence and ultimately declared all defendants guilty in the homicide for hire plot. The case will finally conclude in December of 2024, when each culprit will receive their sentence. The recommended penalty for homicide for hire is life behind bars, and given the mountain of evidence, it's likely that each convicted felon will be punished to the fullest extent of the law. But then again, Mand is a man with immense wealth and connections. Story 3: Bring her back. Don't hurt her, just bring her back. Let her go. Polly Claus had a lifelong fear of the dark. She couldn't sleep unless there was a little light on. She was scared of a mysterious boogeyman and of the possibility of being kidnapped. It was something she had discussed often with her parents. Her father would recall with bitter irony how he had assured his daughter that everything would be all right. I would always be there to protect her. One fateful night, her biggest fear turned to reality. In today's case, we will be looking at how a child was abducted from her own home by a criminal who had repeatedly evaded the justice system. This is the landmark case that would change California law forever. Let's take a closer look at what happened to Polly Claus and how it could have been avoided. It was the beginning of fall in Petaluma, California. Petaluma is a pretty town in Sonoma County. It's about 1 hour north of San Francisco. On Friday, October 1, 1993, a 12-year-old girl named Polly had 2 of her friends over at her mom's house. They were having a lot of fun that night, and earlier in the evening they just hung out together. They ate some popcorn and watched movies. It was a normal fun night for the girls. As the night went on, Polly's sister got tired and went to her room to sleep a little while. After that, Polly's mom, Eve, also needed to go to bed. The 3 girls were still wide awake because they were excited about hanging out together. So they went up to Polly's bedroom. They closed the door and kept talking to each other late into the night. At that moment everything seemed fine. It was just a normal night, but there was something the girls and Polly's family didn't know. Several people were to remember seeing a thickly built bearded male with bushy gray hair loitering on The sidewalk around Polly's home, he was not doing anything threatening and could have been a vagrant or perhaps even just a fellow out for a leisurely evening stroll, but he was not. He had a horrifying plan in mind. Polly Hannah Kloss was born on January 3, 1981 in Fairfax, California to Mark and Eve Kloss. Her parents divorced when she was only 2.5. Mark Kloss was later to remark that the couple had an unsuccessful marriage but a successful divorce because the two remained friends, and while Eve got custody, Mark faithfully visited his only child. Even Polly would move around a great deal while she was growing up. That may be one reason that people often described Polly as shy and say she had trouble forming friendships, although often withdrawn. Polly had a dramatic streak. She very much enjoyed being in school plays and cherished the dream of acting professionally someday. Music was a major interest and she was active in the school band. She had a good sense of humor and enjoyed dressing up like an old lady and hobbling about with a cane which she would use to suddenly whack someone on the behind. Polly spent most holidays and weekends with her dad, who ran a Hearst-Reiner office in San Francisco's Fairmont Hotel. Wherever Polly's family moved, Mark was there. He also worked as a teacher's aide in some of Polly's schools. Her grandfather Joe Kloss said overall Polly was a beautiful young girl who was looking forward to an amazing life. Before that terrible night in 1993, Davis had already established himself as a lifelong criminal. Richard Allen Davis was born on June 2, 1945 as the third of 5 children. His early life has been described as disadvantaged. When Davis was only 3 years old, he and his brothers were playing with matches, so their mother held each boy's hand to a hot stove to punish them for it. She thought this would stop them from playing with fire again, but this kind of punishment doesn't work. Instead, it traumatized Davis and added to his sadistic tendencies. Later on, his father was equally awful and described as unloving. He was mentally unstable and suffered from hallucinations. He was reported to have taken a gun outside the home and shot at mirages. Robert would also beat Richard, breaking his jaw on one occasion and pushing him through an interior wall on another, and was known to be harsh with the others. He witnessed many violent fights between his parents, who finally divorced when Davis was 11, but this only marked the beginning of his troubling behavior. When he was 12, he got in trouble for breaking into places. This happened again when he was 15. At 17, he got caught stealing a motorcycle. The judge gave him a choice: join the army or go to the California Youth Authority. Davis chose the army, but he only stayed for 13 months before they told him to leave. Then in 1973, an incredibly suspicious death was connected to Davis. He went to a party at the home of 18-year-old Marlene Voris. That same night she was found dead of a gunshot wound, and there were 7 suicide notes found at the scene. The police concluded that she committed suicide, but friends of Marlene believed Davis murdered her. He didn't go to jail for that, but he did go to jail for something else. He kidnapped a woman named Frances Mays, using a knife to make her get into his car. He drove her to a remote location, but Frances somehow grabbed the knife and ran out of the car to escape. After that, Davis kept going in and out of jail. He would break into places, sell things he stole, and get arrested, but he always got out after a short time. It was a depraved cycle. Whenever he got out, he'd always go right back to living a life of crime while in state prison. Davis told a psychiatrist that stealing made him feel better. In his own words, it relieved the tensions built up inside him. The psychiatrist diagnosed Davis with an assortment of personality disorders, including avoidant personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and schizoid personality disorder. It was concluded that he couldn't control himself and was dangerous to other people, but somehow Davis managed to stay out of trouble. In 1982, he got out of prison again and went right back to robbing and hurting people. During this time, he met a woman named Sue Edwards, who became his actual partner in crime. In 1984, Davis and Sue went to a woman's house in Redwood City, California, who they knew had some money. The woman's name was Selena Varick, and Sue knew her through her sister. When they got to Selena's house, they hurt her badly and said they would kill her, her father and her daughter if she didn't give them $6,000. At first Selena said no, so they hit her on the head with a gun, causing her to splatter blood. This led to a huge cut that required 5 stitches later. While she was bleeding profusely, Davis and Sue made her wash her hair, then they took her to the bank to get the money they wanted. Selena said Davis looked evil, his eyes looked demonic, he seemed happy about hurting her. Apparently Selena's bruises and fear were not enough to alarm bank personnel. As the transaction took place smoothly, Selena turned the cash over to Sue, who then met up with Davis, and the two happily took off. Not long after this, a police officer pulled over Davis because his truck had a broken light. When he ran a check, the officer found warrants for their crimes against Selena, so the couple was arrested. This time he went to jail for 8 years, while Sue went to jail for a mere 6 months because she lacked a criminal record. In July of 1993, Davis got out of jail again. Just 3 months later, he went to Petaluma. That's when he broke into Polly's home. Polly and her 2 friends were in her bedroom just hanging out, completely clueless to the fact that Davis was right outside. Now we don't know the exact reason why he chose to break into Polly's home. Maybe Davis just wanted to steal things from the house but didn't know Polly and her friends were there. Davis wasn't afraid of getting in trouble with the police either. Remember, he would commit crimes, go to jail, get out, and then commit more crimes. This behavior had just become a way of life for him. Davis got into the house through a window that wasn't locked. Once he was inside, he heard the 3 girls talking and laughing, but before he went to the girls' room, he took a big knife from the kitchen, which shows that he kidnapped Polly on some criminal whim. Instead of planning it, Davis walked quietly up to Polly's bedroom door and opened it. The 3 young girls were terrified when they saw him, so Davis ordered, "Don't scream or I'll cut your throats." He said if they did what he said, everything would be okay. He was just looking for money and wasn't there to hurt them. Polly offered him a box with $50 in cash. He refused it and told the 3 girls to lie down on the floor. He tied up Polly and her friends with white rope before putting pillowcases over 2 of the girls' heads. He told them he would bring Polly back after he finished stealing valuable things from the house. Polly begged him, "Please don't hurt my mom and sister." Her friends remember the terror in her voice. Then he made them count to 1,000, so they started counting. After a few minutes they stopped counting so they could listen. The house was quiet, they couldn't hear any footsteps or other noises. Completely panicked, the girls struggled out of their bonds and rushed to Eve's room to tell her what happened. Still groggy from her sleep, Eve thought they were playing a prank on her. The idea was too strange and terrifying. About 30 minutes after Davis broke into Polly's bedroom, Polly's mother called 911 for help. When she talked to the person on the phone, she said, "Apparently a man just broke into our house and took my daughter." Eve was understandably in total disbelief, begging for her return. "If you're the man, who is Polly, please?" After Eve called for help, the police sent out a message to look for a missing girl and the man who took her. This message went to all of Sonoma County, but there was a problem with how they sent the message. The message went out on Channel 1 of the police radios. Only the sheriffs of each town in the county used Channel 1. The sheriffs were supposed to tell their police officers about the message, but the police officers who were driving around used Channel 3 to talk to each other. This is important to remember. If 2 police officers had gotten the message just 1.5 hours after it was sent out, they might have caught Davis that very night. They might have found Polly before it was too late. Around midnight, something happened about 20 m north of Polly's home. This was in a place called Santa Rosa. A babysitter was leaving the house where she worked. She saw a car stuck in a ditch. The car was on a long private driveway where not many people go, so this seemed strange to her. The babysitter went to a gas station nearby. She called Dana Jaffe, the woman who owned the house where she was babysitting. She told Dana about the car, which Dana thought was strange and concerning too, especially since it was the middle of the night. Dana was a single mom who worked as a cook. She had the babysitter watching her daughter while she was at work, and she didn't want to deal with whatever was happening. She was tired after working all night, so she got in her car with her daughter and they left the house in case the person in the ditch turned out to be dangerous. Dana's gut feeling was right. The person in the ditch was Davis, and he did want to do horrible things that night. As Dana drove away, she actually drove past Davis. She looked right at him. She saw his eyes and thought they looked cold and terrifying. They were the same kind of eyes that Selena, one of Davis's earlier victims, had described years ago. Dana drove to the same gas station where her babysitter was from. There she called 911 and asked the police to go check on her house. Years later, many realized that this was the pivotal moment where Davis came extremely close to being exposed. Two police officers came to Dana's house soon after she called. They went up to the car and questioned Davis, who told them he had swerved to avoid hitting a deer. That's why he ended up in the ditch on the driveway. Remember, these officers didn't know about the message to look for Polly. They did a routine check for his driver's license and his car's license plate number. They saw that he had a criminal record, but there were no current arrest orders for him. But since he had just gotten out of prison 3 months ago, the officers didn't fully believe Davis's story about the deer. They thought he might have been planning to rob Dana's house. One thing the officers could never have imagined was the fact that he had kidnapped a 12-year-old girl just a couple of hours earlier. The officers rightly didn't want to let Davis go, so they wanted Dana to make a citizen's arrest under California law against trespassers. Dana has the right to go up to Davis and tell him, "I arrest you," while the officers are present. Then the officers could take Davis in and look into things more, but Dana didn't want to do this. She just wanted to go to bed and not make a big deal about it. So the officers called for a tow truck to get Davis's car out of the ditch. While they waited, they looked inside his car. It was messy, but they didn't see anything that looked really wrong. They did see an open can of beer. Davis said he opened the beer after he got stuck, since he wasn't driving when the police got there. They believed him. They just made him pour out the beer before he started driving again. The tow truck pulled Davis's car out of the ditch. Davis thanked the officers for helping him. Then he got in his car and followed them back to Highway 101. After that, Davis drove away. This turned out to be extremely tragic. It made the search for Polly much harder. The officers had the man who took Polly right there just hours after he took her. We don't know if Polly was still alive somewhere at that time, but because the officers didn't know about the message to look for Polly, Davis got away again. The news about Polly being taken from her home during a sleepover caused an uproar in the country. It's the 6th day and I'm exhausted. We will never stop. We will never stop. We will never close until we have accomplished our mission and we get my little girl back. Just 6 months before this happened, the internet had become more accessible to the public. Polly's missing person poster was the first one ever to be shared on the internet. Over the next 2 months, millions of posters with Polly's picture were sent all around the world. Polly's picture was even on the cover of People magazine. Popular TV shows like ABC's 2020 in America's Most Wanted talked about what was happening in the search for Polly. Actress Winona Ryder, who grew up in Paloma, the same town where Polly lived, offered $200,000 to anyone who could bring Polly back safely. More than 60,000 people called the police about tips related to Polly, and the police looked into more than 12,000 of these tips. It would have been hard to find anyone in America who didn't know that Polly was missing. If you're old enough, you might even remember hearing about Polly's story yourself when it was happening too. Months after Davis got stuck in Dana Jaffe's driveway, something important happened. It was November 27. Dana was walking around her property where she had some trees cut down recently and wanted to see how it looked while she was walking. Dana saw something red in the mud. When she looked closer, she saw it was a dirty pair of red leggings. Next to the leggings there was a child's black sweatshirt. There were also some white ropes that had been cut. Dana had been hearing a lot about Polly's case on the news. She suddenly remembered the night she saw Davis on her driveway and had a chilling realization she had unknowingly let a child killer get away. The police came and put tape around the area along with the clothes and ropes. They also found a used condom and its wrapper nearby. One of the police officers immediately recognized that the ropes looked like the ones used to tie up Polly's friends. Polly's family also confirmed the clothes belonged to her. Back in Polly's bedroom, the police had found a handprint on the bedpost. They knew it wasn't from Polly's family or friends. Now they hoped it might be from Davis, so they asked many police stations if they had Davis's handprint. Luckily one of them did. The police arrested Davis 2 days later. They asked him questions and told him about the matching handprint. When they asked if he took Polly, he nodded yes. When they asked if Polly was alive, he shook his head no. Davis agreed to show the police where he left Polly. He took them to a place in the woods near Highway 101. Polly's body was hidden under a piece of wood in a shallow hole. The police think that on the night Davis's car got stuck, he had hidden Polly's body in some bushes nearby. The police officers who saw Davis that night remembered that he was sweating a lot even though it wasn't very warm. He also had small sticks and dirt on his clothes and in his hair. After the police helped Davis get his car unstuck and he drove away, he must have gone back to get Polly's body. Then he took her to the place in the woods where he buried her. Polly's death led to big changes in how police work and how criminals are punished across the country. In 1994, California made a new law called 3 strikes and you're out. The law was meant to stop people like Davis who were career criminals from getting out of jail and hurting more people. The 3 strikes law said that if someone did 3 serious crimes, they would go to jail for a very long time. People hoped this would keep dangerous people off the streets. Maybe even more important than the new law, the police changed how they share information. Remember how the message about Polly didn't get to all the police officers? The California Highway Patrol fixed this problem. Now when there's an important message about a crime, it goes to every single police channel. This means all police officers get the information right away. When Davis went to court, the trial didn't take very long. This was because of Davis's criminal history. There was a lot of evidence showing he had taken Polly and he had admitted to doing it during the trial. Davis said some hurtful things that weren't true to her Polly's family. He claimed that Polly had said to him, "Just don't do me like my dad," right before he killed her. This enraged Polly's father, who attempted to lunge at Davis in court before he was restrained because of what Davis did to Polly and how he acted in court. The judge said he deserved the death penalty. Mr. Davis, this is always a traumatic and emotional decision for a judge. You made it very easy today by your conduct. Right now Davis is 70 years old in San Quentin State Prison waiting for the death penalty. There are 2 groups named after Polly, the Polly Class Foundation and the Class Kids Foundation. These groups work to raise awareness about child kidnappings and demand stronger punishments for those who hurt children. Story 4. We often see pastors as symbols of kindness and devotion to God, but what happens when the person we believe to be a man of faith turns out to be a servant of the devil? More than a decade ago, Randy Stone, a loving husband, father and well-respected member of the community, was found shot to death in his office. His desk was covered with notes for church activities and financial accounts of the church reflecting how he devoted his life to it. The police quickly ruled it a homicide, and as the town gathered to mourn Randy, no one suspected the truth was lurking so close. Soon whispers began to surface, secrets that pointed to someone no one would have ever imagined. What could have led To such a shocking turn of events, let's dive into this and uncover the shocking truth behind the murder of Randy Stone. To get started, let's get to know Randy and his wife Teresa a little better. Randy and Teresa had known each other since childhood but lost touch when Randy enlisted in the Marines at the age of 18. After serving his country, he returned home to Kansas City, Missouri in the spring of 1990, and he had only one person on his mind, Teresa. They connected at March and quickly fell in love, marrying by October of the same year. Their family blossomed soon after with the arrival of their son Michael a year later, followed by their daughter Miranda 2 years after that, and life in Independence, Missouri seemed picture perfect for the Stones as they became active members of the New Hope Baptist Church, embraced by their community. Now Randy owned a small insurance company and served as the church's minister of records, managing finances and ensuring everything ran smoothly. Teresa, a talented singer, performed in the choir and volunteered her time whenever possible, supporting various church activities. Through their many church events, the Stones developed a close friendship with the new pastor David Love, who was only 38 at the time. He and his wife Kim had 3 children, creating a warm and family-friendly atmosphere at the church. At this point, everything seemed to be going smoothly, with everyone supporting one another. After about 14 years of marriage, Teresa devoted herself to being a loving stay-at-home mom, always actively involved in her children's lives. She also helped Randy at the insurance office, playing a vital role in the family business. Randy was well liked in town, and together the Stones were cherished members of their community, known for their kindness and dedication, and the love only intensified when in 2004 Teresa announced that their family was growing again. She was pregnant with Michael and Miranda, approaching their teenage years. The news came as a surprising twist, however. There was a bit of controversy surrounding this joyful announcement. Randy had undergone a vasectomy years earlier, so he believed they wouldn't be having more children. Despite his doubts, Randy remained loyal to Teresa and accepted the news, convinced that the baby was indeed his. Sadly, their happiness was short-lived when Teresa experienced a miscarriage. In the aftermath, she struggled emotionally and sought support from her church, specifically turning to Pastor David Love for comfort and guidance. Their counseling sessions increased, meeting 2 to 3 times a week without fail. Meanwhile, Teresa began to withdraw from Randy, distancing herself from her husband. Randy attributed her behavior to mourning the loss of her child and tried to be understanding. He also sought guidance from Pastor Love, and the two began meeting every morning to discuss everything from life's challenges to its joys. Randy had always looked up to Pastor Love. In fact, he wrote in a self-help book that David Love was one of the most influential people in his life, an advisor and a close friend. However, in early 2010 things began to change between Randy and the pastor. While fulfilling his role as the minister of records and being part of the church's finance committee, Randy uncovered a troubling issue with the church's finances. As he reviewed the church's accounts, he noticed that some funds were missing. To make matters worse, checks for the missing money had Pastor Love's signature on them. This discovery shocked Randy and made him question everything he thought he knew about his friend. On March 17, 2010, Randy decided to confront the situation head-on. He sent Pastor Love an email expressing his concerns, stating that he didn't agree with how the pastor was handling the church's finances. In response, Pastor Love refused to admit any wrongdoing, which only fueled Rhee's frustration. Feeling betrayed and uneasy, Randy made a difficult decision. He resigned from his position at the church. Although he didn't pursue the allegation any further, he did inform Pastor Love that he would be removing his family from the congregation. 2 weeks later, on March 31, 2010, Teresa arrived at the insurance office and was met with a horrifying scene. Her husband Randy was lying on the floor behind his desk, unresponsive and surrounded by blood. Panicking, Teresa called 911, telling the Operator that there was blood coming from Rhee's ear, suggesting that it might have been an accident, perhaps he had fallen. However, when the police arrived they quickly reached a different conclusion. Randy Stone had been shot and sadly he did not survive. Investigators noted that there were no signs of a struggle in the office and cash remained untouched on his desk. This led them to believe it was not a robbery but rather a homicide. The gunshot wound was at point-blank range and they found a spent casing from a .40 caliber pistol nearby. They also discovered that the gun used in the crime was Rhee's own firearm, typically kept locked away and accessible only to him. But there was one more shocking clue in the trash bin next to Teresa's desk. Investigators found torn pieces of paper that they were able to piece together into a note, or rather a love letter. It was addressed to Teresa and started with "Happy birthday, love." The message continued with a sentiment about not being in control yet, but promising that when they were fully together her birthdays would always be special. The note was unsigned, suggesting that the author would be someone familiar to Teresa. However, the police quickly determined that Randy Stone was not the writer. A pad of paper on his desk showed a series of reminders written in his handwriting which did not match the handwriting on the love letter. This left investigators wondering who was Teresa's secret admirer, and could this person be linked to Rhee's murder. The police suspected that the murderer was someone close to Randy, making it a targeted attack rather than a random act of violence. To gather more information they decided to attend Rhee's funeral equipped with audio recording devices. They believed that the killer might be present among the mourners, and conversations, comments or behaviors at the service could potentially lead them to the crucial evidence. Indeed, attending the funeral was a wise decision for the investigators. Pastor Love delivered a heartfelt eulogy capturing the pain and confusion surrounding Rhee's unexpected death. He addressed the mourners' grief, saying, "We sit here today and weep not just because we are separated from our loved one, but because of all the questions that death brings. Questions like why him, why now? Without answers, death seems so cold. We see the body here surrounded by flowers and we think we expected him to grow old. We thought we would share many moments together. How can we reconcile our anticipation with death being swallowed up in victory?" While the Stone family and the church community continued to grieve, the police were hard at work on the investigation, starting with Teresa Stone. Her behavior immediately raised suspicions. Instead of showing the usual signs of grief, Teresa seemed strangely composed, almost too calm, even happy during her questioning. And it wasn't just her odd demeanor that caught the detectives' attention. Teresa gave them a rock-solid alibi for the time of Rhee's murder. She recalled her every move down to the exact minute and had receipts to back up her story. This level of detail felt off. Typically, someone in shock or grief wouldn't remember the smallest things they did before discovering their spouse's body. The fact that Teresa could recall everything so clearly only made her seem more suspicious. The detectives then asked about the mysterious love letter. When detectives brought it up, Teresa seemed almost flustered. "Oh, that birthday note, I totally forgot about it until yesterday," she explained. "It was just torn up. It was left on my car door by someone I don't even know. I never received another note from him." She insisted that she had nothing to hide. Detectives pressed further, asking if there had been any recent trouble in her marriage. Teresa mentioned a brief issue with Rhee's struggle with pornography, but insisted that they had worked through it, and described their nearly 20-year marriage as joyful and strong. At that point, there was no direct evidence linking Teresa to Rhee's death, only her strange behavior and a series of unanswered questions. Yet the detectives were certain there was more beneath the surface, and they weren't ready to give up until they uncovered the full truth. This case became even more troubling when a friend of Rhee's, Robert Davis, revealed that Teresa had come to him the very night of her husband's death. What was most shocking was her calm demeanor. She seemed completely unfazed by the tragedy. Instead, her focus was on something entirely different: how to collect on Rhee's life insurance policy. Robert found it strange, especially since it hadn't even been 24 hours since Rhee's murder. What made things even more suspicious was the fact that Randy, who worked in the insurance business, had two life insurance policies totaling $800,000. Could this have been the motive for murder? Detectives soon uncovered that Randy had made a significant change to those policies. He had removed Teresa as the beneficiary and listed their children instead. To their knowledge, Teresa had no idea this change had been made. As they dug deeper, the police began hearing whispers of a disturbing rumor circulating within the New Hope Baptist Church. Apparently, Teresa and Pastor David Love were having an affair. It wasn't just gossip, it was the church's worst kept secret. David Love, who arrived at the crime scene soon after the authorities, was a close friend of the Stone family. Naturally, he was questioned by the police. However, when the conversation began to heat up, Pastor Love requested an attorney, cutting the discussion short. But the detectives were far from done with him. A search of Pastor Love's computer uncovered shocking evidence: intimate emails and photos exchanged between him and Teresa. There were also plans for a future together, engagement rings, wedding arrangements disguised as plans for Teresa's daughter. One particular message from Pastor Love stood out. The affair had been clearly going on for years. The couple even drew parallels to the biblical story of King David, who arranged for the death of Sheba's husband so he could marry her. Pastor Love told Teresa that despite King David's actions, God still blessed their union. Teresa responded by saying by the time that Teresa sat down with detectives for another round of questioning, they had uncovered 10 years of correspondence between her and Pastor Love. Both admitted to having a long-standing affair, but this only raised more questions. Was the affair connected to Rhee's murder, and just how far were they willing to go to be together? The detectives were closing in, and the truth was inching closer. As the police delved deeper into the case, they sifted through thousands of personal phone records, determined to uncover any hidden communications. Interestingly, prepaid cell phones that Teresa Stone and Pastor David Love had used to keep their affair under wraps. These phones might have gone unnoticed if it weren't for their occasional slip-ups where they made calls to their regular phone lines. But the phone records revealed more than just sweet messages and wedding dreams. On the morning of Randy Stone's murder, investigators noticed that David Love's phone had pinged off a tower just a few miles from Rhee's insurance office. This raised immediate alarm bells. Then there was the ominous text Teresa received that read, "Urgent, do not go to the office by yourself." Despite the warning, Teresa went to the office anyway, where she made the gruesome discovery of her husband's lifeless body on the floor. Investigators confronted Teresa with the phone data as well as the torn love letter they found in the trash. At first, she stuck to her story, claiming the prepaid phones were only used to keep her counseling sessions with David a secret. She said his wife Kim had always been uneasy about how much attention David gave her over the years. By this point, detectives had far too much evidence to let Teresa's flimsy excuses slide. They pushed her harder, laying out the facts that pointed to a premeditated murder. Teresa tried to deny it all, insisting that the phones, the messages, and even the affair had nothing to do with Rhee's death. When the investigators continued pressing her, Teresa started to crack. The weight of her lies became too much. She finally admitted to the affair, but maintained that David Love was innocent and had nothing to do with Rhee's murder. Yet her confession didn't stop there. In a stunning twist, Teresa revealed another secret. She had become pregnant with David's child during their illicit relationship. She told the police that she had wanted to end her decade-long affair with Pastor David Love for some time, but had been too afraid to do so. She even confided in family and friends that she let Pastor Love give the eulogy at her husband Rhee's funeral out of fear of how he might react if she refused. "I told him to leave me alone. He wouldn't stop texting me or calling me." But the investigators had more pressing questions. David had sent a warning text to Teresa on the morning of the murder, telling her not to go to the office alone. Yet the moment she discovered Ree's body, her first call wasn't to 911, it was to her mother. Oddly, Teresa was very clear about what had happened. She told her mother that Randy had been shot despite the police not knowing that detail. Yet this inconsistency made the detectives question her even further. How did you know Randy had been shot? They asked. Teresa hesitated before breaking down, finally confessing that Pastor Love had come to her that very night and confessed everything. He told her in chilling detail how he had walked into Ree's office, aimed the gun and fired the fatal shot. Desperate to solidify their case, investigators had Teresa place a call to David, hoping he might confess again. The call was recorded. I want to know why, Teresa. Why? You know why David didn't confess over the phone, but the damage was done. Police had already pieced together enough evidence to implicate him. Surveillance footage showed a Ford Taurus driving in the area where the murder took place. Pastor Love had been using his son's Taurus after losing his driving privileges due to a DUI. His warning text message to Teresa and the location of his cell phone near the crime scene were the final nails in the coffin. With a search warrant in hand, investigators searched David Love's home and his church. Realizing the noose was tightening around him, Pastor Love fled Missouri and moved to South Carolina. David Love was arrested there after a Jackson County grand jury indicted him on charges of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. The former pastor's arrest marked the beginning of the end for a tangled web of lies and betrayal. Only hours after being placed behind bars, David made a phone call to his wife Kim. For years the affair between David and Teresa Stone had been an open secret, one that Kim was all too aware of. Yet despite her suspicions, she asked him over and over on that call, "Did you do it?" David, knowing full well that the conversation was being recorded, chose to remain silent. He never admitted to anything, but his silence spoke volumes. What Kim didn't know, however, was the full scope of the twisted plan she had narrowly escaped in the weeks after Randy Stone's murder. Teresa had confided in a pastor in West Virginia, revealing a chilling detail that shocked even the investigators. Randy wasn't the only target. Teresa had confessed that David had also planned to kill his own wife Kim. The plot involved David breaking her neck and staging her death as a car accident, rolling her down a hill to make it look like a tragic mishap. With their spouses gone, David and Teresa hoped to collect Ree's life insurance, clear David's debts, and start a new life together. Unfortunately, those plans never came to fruition. In November 2011, overwhelmed by the mountain of evidence against him, the 51-year-old pastor finally took a plea deal for second-degree murder. This allowed him to avoid a trial, and in doing so spared Ree's grieving family the additional pain of reliving the details in court. David Love's guilty plea brought a measure of closure, though for Ree's family the emotional wounds would never fully heal. One family member shared her thoughts: he took accountability for what he did, and at least the family didn't have to suffer through a long trial. But the case was far from over. As David sat in prison, attention turned to Teresa Stone. She was now facing charges as a co-conspirator in her husband's murder in the spring of 2012. Teresa, under the weight of the evidence in her own conscience, finally confessed to her role in the crime. But for Ree's family, especially his mother Clara, the confession was too little too late. Teresa had been like family, and accepting her betrayal was a bitter pill to swallow. I would have rather she'd filed for divorce, even though I don't believe in divorce, but I'd rather do that. If you're that unhappy, divorce them, she even added at the end. He told me he would love her until the day he died. And I truly believe he did. Robert Davis, one of Ree's closest friends, said he worshipped Teresa. She was everything to him, no matter where we were, whether it was a work event or something social. He was always on the phone with her, or she'd be calling him. They were constantly in contact. In the end, Teresa pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, a Class B felony that carried a potential sentence of 5 to 15 years in prison. For many of Ree's loved ones, this didn't seem like enough time for the woman who had taken a good man's life. During her sentencing hearing, the full extent of Teresa's involvement became clear. She admitted to telling David where Rhee's gun was kept and how to access it. Their text messages filled with discussions about Rhee's guns and talk of taking care of things with one shot to the head were damning evidence. Despite everything, Teresa's children, Michael and Miranda, stood by their mother during the hearing. They tearfully pleaded for mercy, emphasizing how much they still needed her in their lives, especially after losing their father. I ask you today to show mercy on my case. I will do anything I have to do to pay back your honor. In the end, Teresa was sentenced to 8 years in prison. David Love, the former pastor who had once been trusted and admired, received a life sentence with the possibility of parole. In 2036, his wife Kim divorced him and has since remarried, saying she harbors no ill will towards her ex-husband or Teresa. She has moved on with her life. Teresa, after serving her sentence, was released from prison and is now reported to be living in the Kansas City area with a new partner. As for Randy Stone, his memory lives on as that of an honorable Marine, a devoted family man, and a loyal member of the New Hope Baptist Church. His untimely death remains a tragic reminder of the dark and destructive power of betrayal, but many people couldn't shake the feeling that Teresa didn't deserve such a light ending while she served her time in prison. It didn't change the fact that she played a role in plotting her own husband's murder and showed little to no remorse afterward. Some even went so far as to suggest that she might have manipulated her children, making them believe that losing her was somehow more painful than losing their father. And then there's Pastor David Love, a man trusted by his community and admired by many, including Randy Stone. As a pastor, David was supposed to be a moral guide, a source of comfort. Instead, he betrayed that trust in the most horrifying way. Not only did he have an affair with Teresa, but he also conspired with her to take a man's life, a man who had once respected and looked up to him. It's a troubling thought, isn't it? But as we've often said on this channel, the people you think you know best aren't always who they seem. Sometimes the kindest person in your life may be hiding the darkest secrets. Story 5. The last time I spoke to Sarah Jane on the phone was unfortunately the last time that I spoke to any of my children. Abusing your wife is already terrible, but taking advantage of your stepdaughter in a one-sided relationship is beyond evil. Over 2 decades ago, Lee Ford became known as one of the worst stepdads ever. After mistreating his step-family for years, he tragically ended the lives of his wife and her 4 children in the most gruesome way. The details of this case are truly heartbreaking, and we're diving into it because there's a real possibility that this man could be released in the coming years. A lot of people are understandably against it, and once you hear the full story, you'll see why. Stick around until the end and you'll have a much clearer idea of why his release is such a huge concern for many. Let's kick things off with Lisi, the central figure in this story. On April 3, 1964, in the charming Riverside town of Foringbridge, Hampshire, England, Lisi Wyatt gave birth to a beautiful baby girl named Lisi Margaret Wyatt. Growing up in Telford, Shropshire, Leslie was surrounded by her loving brother and sister. She grew up to be a spirited and kind person, always ready to help others and greet everyone with a warm smile. At 18, she met Michael Tranner, a guy who seemed like he could be the love of her life. Michael was working one day when he spotted Leslie on the bus. Leslie was working at a nursing home in Wellington at the time, and the connection was instant. Michael thought Leslie was amazing and felt like he'd hit the jackpot. They got along so well that he couldn't wait to walk her home and get to know her better. Their relationship took off quickly. They moved in together, got married, and started a family right away. Michael was overjoyed about becoming a dad, saying it was a dream come true. Leslie, who loved kids, was equally excited. Their first child, Sarah Jane, was born on January 10, 1983. Shortly after, Leslie was pregnant again, leading to the arrival of Anne-Marie about a year and a half later. Their family grew with the addition of Stephen and then Craig Jonathan. It seemed like they were a happy family with Lisi and Michael clearly showing their love for each other through their growing family, but as often happens, things took a turn. The pressure of raising 4 kids so quickly started to weigh heavily on their marriage. Just a year after Craig was born, Michael moved out and their marriage ended in divorce. Now Leslie didn't spend much time dwelling on her divorce. She quickly moved on and married a new man named Lee Ford in early 1990. Lee was a laborer from Telford, and after they got married, Lacey and Lee had 2 children together. Unfortunately, the exact years of their births aren't widely documented, as for Leslie and Michael's friends and family, they were all skeptical about Lee Ford. He just gave off a vibe that made those who knew Leslie uneasy. On top of that, Leslie and Lee didn't seem like a perfect match. Leslie was slim and attractive, while Lee had a rough, scruffy look and came across as pretty tough. But what really raised red flags about their relationship was Lee's open dislike for Leslie's ex-partner, Michael. Lee made it clear from the get-go that he didn't want Michael around. He went out of his way to push Michael out of their lives, making excuses to keep him away whenever Michael tried to visit the kids. Lee's controlling nature and extreme jealousy were obvious right from the start, which are often signs of abusive behavior. We know that extreme jealousy is a risk factor in domestic abuse perpetrators, and therefore they like to think that their wife has never had a previous partner, and in this case he had 4 reminders for children daily, reminding them, and Michael was a good father. But the warning signs didn't stop there. Just a few months into their marriage, Lee revealed his true colors. He started hitting Leslie and acting aggressively towards her. Leslie soon found herself reaching out for help, telling friends and family that Lee was abusing her. By 1995, Leslie had reached her breaking point. She packed up her children and moved to Cornwall, desperate to escape Lee and start a new life. Her move was a clear sign of her fear and determination to protect her family. However, Lee wasn't ready to let go. He tracked Leslie down by posing as a solicitor and contacting her family, showing just how far he was willing to go to keep control over her. Despite the alarming signs, Leslie decided to give Lee Ford another chance. Hoping for a fresh start, they relocated to Key, a small village in Cornwall, with Leslie's 6 children, including the 4 from a previous marriage. But Ford's promises of change turned out to be empty. His abusive behavior only got worse. He became even more controlling, dictating what Leslie could wear and trying to dominate every aspect of her life. Now let's not rush to blame Lacey for not leaving Lee Ford sooner. Being stuck in an abusive relationship for a long time can seriously damage your self-esteem, making it incredibly hard to break free. A psychologist who looked into this case even said that Lee Ford's abusive behavior stemmed from Leslie's deep love for her children. As we've mentioned earlier, Ford had a big problem with Leslie's ex, Michael, and with Leslie's 4 kids, who constantly reminded him of Michael. Ford felt constantly sidelined because Leslie always put her children first. This frustration caused him to pull away from the family and spend more time drinking at the pub. His anger grew as he felt increasingly pushed aside, but Ford knew exactly what he was getting into. He married a divorced woman with kids, yet his immature and controlling behavior was totally out of line. Reports say that instead of joining in family activities, he would isolate himself in the garage to watch TV. The kids wanted to watch their own shows, and Ford's retreat to the garage wasn't just about wanting some alone time. It showed how disconnected and dissatisfied he was becoming. His growing isolation led him to unhealthy habits like drug use and heavy drinking, which only made his negative feelings worse. Meanwhile, Leslie's ex, Michael, was over 200 miles away in Telford and had been cut off from his children for 5 years. At Ford's request, Michael was a loving father, and the situation of being kept away from his beloved kids left him feeling powerless and helpless. What's truly heartbreaking about this situation is how deeply it affected the children. They were right there witnessing Lee Ford's abusive behavior towards their mother, and it took a heavy toll on their lives. Sarah Jane, for example, was a very quiet Student with a troubling school record. Her poor attendance was a big red flag hinting that something was seriously wrong at home, and Marie also showed signs of distress which made it hard for others to connect with her. These behaviors were clear signals that the children were struggling. Leslie's brother Peter noticed this firsthand. When he visited his sister, he saw how the kids acted differently when Ford was around. When Ford wasn't present, they were lively and engaging just like kids should be, but as soon as he showed up their demeanor changed dramatically. They became subdued and withdrawn, a clear sign that something was seriously amiss. They had gone out of the room or out of the house and they'd be totally different. They'd be bubbly and laughing, joking, running around, jumping up and down, and things really like normal kids should do. So he was very controlling over the kids, I think, as well. But Ford's overprotectiveness of Sarah Jane was particularly troubling. He would keep a close eye on her, even showing up at places she went to. This wasn't just about safety, it was a form of control. Ford was constantly monitoring her movements, which is a big red flag for abusive behavior. Things took a much darker turn when reports revealed that Ford had a sexual relationship with Sarah Jane. She was just 17 at the time, and Ford had been a part of her life since she was 6. This wasn't a one-time thing, it was the culmination of years of grooming and manipulation. Sarah Jane had been subjected to abuse for a long time, making the situation even more tragic. There are also reports that it wasn't just Sarah Jane but also Marie who were involved. This might explain why both of them were often quiet and kept to themselves. It's likely that the trauma they experienced played a big part in their behavior and isolation. Peter revealed in an interview that Leslie was aware of the disturbing situation for a while and chose to confide in him, asking for his advice. Despite Peter's serious concerns and warnings, Ford managed to convince Lisi that everything was just fine. Sadly, Leslie's decision to stay with Ford had devastating consequences, and the children were caught in the crossfire. Ford's behavior continued to spiral out of control. Feeling overwhelmed and desperate to change her situation, Leslie made the brave decision to leave him. In August 2000, she sought legal help to get a restraining order against Ford and began the process of rebuilding her life for her kids. Meanwhile, Michael, who had been longing to reconnect with his children, took the opportunity to reach out to Sarah Jane. Unfortunately, when he called, she was busy, and that call turned out to be both the first and last time he would speak to any of his children in years. The thought of Lisi leaving him and the potential public exposure of his abuse of Sarah Jane and Marie terrified Lee. Forward, this fear led to an explosive confrontation between him and Lisi. On August 30, they had a heated argument about their separation, pushing Lee to the brink. In a moment of unimaginable horror, he decided to commit a crime that no one could have anticipated. After that day, Leslie and her 4 children vanished without a trace. Lee told friends and neighbors in the quiet Cornish village of Carney that Leslie had left him, taking the children with her. He cancelled a job interview, claiming the family had come down with food poisoning. To cover his tracks, he sent his 2 biological children to stay with relatives and enrolled his youngest child in a new school. Meanwhile, he continued to live in their pebble-dashed bungalow. Lee even attempted to cash in Sarah Jane's last paycheck from McDonald's and made advances to a former girlfriend, all while insisting that Leslie had abandoned him. What's truly chilling is that after weeks of their supposed disappearance, Lee had the audacity to call Peter Leslie's brother. He said Peter, confused and concerned, replied that Leslie wasn't with him and asked what was going on. Lee claimed they had a fight over money and that Leslie had left with the kids, but Peter wasn't convinced by Lee's story. Lee's refusal to let Leslie take the younger children and Peter's gut feeling made him suspect that something terrible had happened. Even though he didn't want to believe it, Peter's growing fears led him to contact the police, initiating a missing persons investigation. The senior investigator on the case noted an unsettling feeling from the outset. Alarm bells started ringing as soon as Peter reported Leslie's disappearance. Michael, who was also married at the time, grew Increasingly worried, he confided in his wife that he believed Lee Ford had killed the children, although his wife thought he was being irrational. Michael's instinct turned out to be tragically accurate after Peter reported Lacey and her children missing. The police quickly got involved. Lee Ford, panicked by the investigation, took drastic measures. He rearied the decaying bodies of Sarah Jane and Marie, wrapping them in polyene. Wearing a face mask, he moved the bodies from the woodshed to a potato field about 4 miles away. Ford then took his own children to visit their grandparents in Shropshire, all while planning to move the remaining 3 bodies. On October 4, police held a press conference announcing that Ford and his 2 children were also missing. Later that day, Ford was arrested while driving across Bodmin Moor. His children were found safe, and that night the police discovered the first of the bodies. Ford, who occasionally worked as a builder and roofer and was known for spending a lot of time drinking at the local cricket club, confessed to the murders over a harrowing 24-hour period. Ford murdered his wife Lacey and her 4 children, Sarah Jane, who was 17, and Marie 16, Stephen 14, and Craig just 13. And it all started when Leslie finally found the guts to confront Ford again about his messed up relationship with her daughters. She had been worried and upset for a while, and she decided it was time to face him head on. This confrontation was intense and ugly, and it didn't end well. Ford responded with a horrifyingly brutal attack. What started as a heated argument turned into something much darker. On the fateful day of the murders, he grabbed a baseball bat and used it to beat her severely right in their bedroom. The whole attack was brutal and unrelenting. After he had finished with that, he didn't stop there. Ford went to his garage, got a piece of rope, and came back to strangle Leslie. He was chillingly precise, using the rope in a way that left barely any visible marks on her. But Ford's killing spree didn't end with Leslie. Next, he turned his sights on Leslie's 4 kids, who he had been raising for more than 10 years. It was clear he had this all planned out. He systematically went through each child, killing them one by one. He approached them from behind using that same length of rope, and made sure the murders were carried out in such a way that there were minimal signs of struggle or trauma. It was a horrifying display of premeditation and control. The pathologist later described his method as efficient, which just adds to the creepiness of it all. Ford had done his homework on this. He researched extensively on how to commit murder without getting caught, and it showed in the way he executed his plan. After the killings, he didn't just leave the bodies lying around. Instead, he moved them around to different locations to make sure they wouldn't be easily found. Ford took the bodies from a woodshed and moved them to a potato field, wrapping them in polyene to try and hide the evidence. He only spared his own 2 children with Lacey. His complete lack of remorse during his confession and throughout his court appearances was chilling. At first, Lee Ford tried to play it cool and pleaded not guilty to the murder charges, but on the morning of his trial, May 24, 2001, he decided to change his tune and admitted to killing his wife Lacey and her 4 kids. After he came clean, the court wasn't too lenient. A few days later, he was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences, 1 for each murder. Initially, Ford was facing a minimum of 35 years in prison before he could even think about parole. However, that got knocked down to 27 years, so now he's got to wait at least that long before he might have a chance at getting out. The impact on the community and the families of the victims was deep and lasting. Friends, neighbors, and relatives were left grappling with the enormity of the loss. Memorials and tributes sprang up in honor of the victims, and the local school created a book of condolence and a memorial garden. The funerals were deeply somber, with everyone reflecting on the lives that were cut short and the gaping hole left behind. Michael, Leslie's ex-partner and Peter, Leslie's brother, have been trying to cope with the loss over the years. They find some comfort in the memories they have and the support from their community. Even with time, the pain of losing their loved ones is still very real. Now there's a new layer of worry as there's talk about Ford possibly being released at some point. Family and friends of the victims have started a petition to make sure Ford stays behind bars and never gets out. This petition mistakenly claims he could apply for parole in the next 3 years, but that's not right. The parole board confirmed that Ford isn't up for parole. Yet he has to serve the full 27 years, which means he won't even be considered for parole until October 2027, when the time comes. The Secretary of State for Justice will refer his case to the parole board, who will then review whether it's safe to release him. Sometimes prisoners with life sentences can be looked at by the parole board up to 2 years before their minimum term is over. The board decides if they should be moved to an open prison as a step toward potential release, but for now Ford's case remains firmly under review, and his early release isn't on the table. At the end of the day, Ford absolutely deserves to be locked up and face the harshest punishment for what he did. Leslie's kids had no business going through any of that. They were completely innocent. We can only hope and pray that he never gets out of there. So if you're dealing with an abusive partner or someone toxic in your life, don't hesitate to reach out for help. It's crucial to put yourself first and take steps to protect yourself. Story 6. Before Robert Fisher wound up one of the FBI's 10 most wanted, he was a dad to Brittany and Bobby, a husband to Mary. Mary was sweet. He would probably say she was a little difficult. In April 2001 in Scottsdale, Arizona, the Pfizer family's home exploded in a devastating fire. Inside, the bodies of Mary and her 2 kids were found murdered before the fire even started. The prime suspect, Robert William Fisher, vanished without a trace. This is the story of the Pfizer family murders. Robert William Fisher was born on April 13, 1961 in Brooklyn, New York City, as the middle child of William and Jan Pfizer. In 1976 his parents divorced, which left Robert and his 2 sisters to move with their father to Arizona. They all went to Saguaro High School in Tucson, but the family split had a lasting impact on Robert. Friends from his high school days remember him as being quite bitter about the divorce. In fact, he later talked frequently about it with his co-workers and revealed how much he felt his mother's departure had changed his life. Fisher joined the United States Navy and tried to become a SEAL, but he didn't make the cut. He loved the outdoors and he particularly enjoyed hunting and fishing. After a stint as a firefighter in California, which ended due to a back injury, he moved his family to Arizona. There he started working in the medical field and took on roles as a surgical catheter technician and respiratory therapist in the late 1980s. He also worked briefly as a weed sprayer. One of his former employers described him as a quiet man who struggled with back pain but was reliable on the job. In 1987 Robert Fisher met and married Mary Cooper, and they seemed to have a solid relationship. They moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, where they built a life together with their 2 children and a black lab, living in the 2200 block of 74th Place. From the outside they appeared to be a normal church-going family, as they were actively involved in their Baptist church, but as time went on cracks began to show in their marriage. The difficulty was he had had a difficulty with his parents and the divorce that they had gone through, and so he had told me he'd never go through that again. In one particularly harsh incident, Fisher turned a garden hose on Mary after he felt she had spoken out of turn. He was also embarrassed that his son Bobby didn't share his passion for hunting and fishing. One time he tried to teach Bobby and his daughter Brittany how to swim by throwing them off a boat. According to his hunting partner Sandy Gillespie, the children were crying and Brittany was screaming. Fisher pulled them back into the boat and said, "Now there, how's that?" Fisher's controlling nature extended to the home, where he wouldn't allow the walls to be painted any color other than white, and only a few pictures were permitted on the walls. Mary's friend Kimberly Sue Davidson told police that Mary's mother had made special items like quilts several times, but Mary wasn't allowed to hang them up. Instead, she had to store them in the closet, with Robert constantly nagging her to get rid of them. Despite this, Fisher tried to maintain the image of a devoted family man. Mary took a job which she described to friends as a security fund, while Robert worked at the Mayo Clinic Scottsdale campus as a respiratory therapist and catheter technician. Though he was considered a good worker, his colleagues noticed that he often talked about his marital problems. He often mentioned how his parents' divorce had affected him, once saying that his life would have been much better if his mother Jan hadn't left his father. These issues even came up during his hunting and fishing trips, where he would discuss his struggles with his friends. In time, Fisher displayed even more disturbing behavior. There was a time where they had gotten an elk and were preparing it, and he randomly decided to smear the blood on his face as well as do other strange things. On another occasion during a camping trip, he sneaked up behind some unsuspecting campers he didn't even know and fired his gun into the air multiple times just to scare them. Witnesses reported that he was smiling and laughing as he did this. More issues began to surface in his marriage, which caught the attention of their circle of friends. It was said that he showed more affection to his black Labrador retriever than to his family. In some home videos, his interactions with his family come across as very cold and odd. Robert William Fisher's first run-in with the law occurred in 1997 when he had a dispute over a stray football that apparently belonged to a neighbor. He claimed the dog kept coming onto his property and trying to attack the dog, and eventually he shot the pit bull when it came onto his property. Of course, the police were called and they believed that Robert had tried to get the dog onto his property on purpose as he hated it. Robert claimed otherwise and will probably never know the full truth. Meanwhile, the clash between Robert and Mary got out of control. They even sought counseling from their pastor at church, but nothing seemed to help. Robert was extremely controlling at that point. He wouldn't allow anything to be put up on the walls unless it was something he wanted. For example, Mary once received a tapestry from a relative, but Robert wouldn't let her hang it up. He constantly nagged her about various things. Ironically, neighbors living nearby at the time mentioned that during their frequent yelling matches they could always hear Mary screaming, but they never actually heard Robert yelling. This might have been because Robert was trying to pretend like a gentle, loving family man, even though he wasn't. He had confided in his co-workers that the marriage was falling apart, but he also said divorce is not an option. Mary, on the other hand, had told friends that she was planning to divorce Robert in the coming weeks. On the night of April 9, 2001, neighbors reported hearing another massive fight coming from the Pfizer household at around 10:30 in the evening. And in a sudden moment, everything caught fire. The shockwave shook homes, and within moments 911 calls started flooding in from nearly every neighborhood nearby. The explosion was so powerful that it blew out the brick wall of the Pfizer house. It was an intense, fully involved fire with flames towering over 20 feet high. The firefighters focused on keeping the fire from spreading to the closely packed neighboring houses as they tried to put out the fire. They had no idea what they were dealing with or whether anyone was trapped inside. Once they finally got the fire under control and extinguished, they started to investigate. It was then that they noticed one of the Pfizer family vehicles. Mary's Forerunner was missing. There was a brief hope that the family had left before the explosion, unaware of the tragedy, but that hope quickly faded. The explosion had been so powerful that it had even damaged Robert's truck, which had been parked right in front of the house. As investigators began sifting through the rubble, they brought in the forensics team to piece what had actually happened. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for them to make a discovery: the remains of 3 bodies. At first it was assumed that they had died in the fire, but a closer examination revealed something far more disturbing. The forensics team uncovered evidence that pointed to foul play. They found a hose leading into the furnace that had been pulled out on purpose, and nearby a candle had been set on the floor next to accelerants like gasoline. It became clear that this was a staged scene. Someone had planned this to either cover up evidence or by themselves. More time. At this point the investigators were uncertain about many details, but what they learned from the medical examiner was even more horrifying. The bodies discovered were those of Robert Fisher's family, his wife Mary Cooper and his two children Brittany Fisher, as well as Robert Bobby William Fisher Jr. The examination revealed that they had been murdered before the fire started. One item that survived the fire was Robert Fisher's gun safe, which had several weapons in it. However, his handgun was missing along with the weapons. The safe also held some movies and some other personal items. On the evening of the murders, Pfizer was captured on the surveillance tape at an ATM machine around 10:40 p.m. He withdrew the daily maximum of $280 in the footage. He was seen wearing an Oakland Raiders cap, and you can see Mary's white fur forerunner in the background. Most authorities and investigators involved in the case believe this transaction took place after the crime. At first it took a few days before Pfizer was officially listed as a suspect or even a person of interest, but as the pieces began to come together they realized that he most likely had some kind of involvement or was the guilty party. Nothing seemed to add up. If he were innocent, why didn't he come home? If he had just been out blowing off steam and something like this happened to his family by chance, it would be an unimaginable coincidence. There was also the fact that all of his clothes had been removed from the house. Why would he take all of his clothes and withdraw that money unless he was planning to flee eventually? Robert William Fisher was charged with 3 counts of felony murder, 1 count of felony arson and unlawful flight. To avoid prosecution, pictures and posters of him were distributed widely. Fisher was a white male, roughly 6 feet tall. At the time of his disappearance he weighed about 180 pounds, though his current weight is unknown. If he is still alive, he has a surgical scar on his lower back and a gold upper bicuspid tooth which he could have had removed after finding Mary Fisher's car in Tonto National Forest. The police faced challenging weather conditions as foul weather and snow moved into the area. This forced the suspension of the search, which only covered about a mile around the vehicle's location. Footsteps were found leading toward the Fort Apache Indian Reservation, but that area was never thoroughly searched. This has led many, including those who have followed or investigated the case, to speculate that Robert Pfizer may have reached the reservation and either got help or found a ride which led him to escape. The failure to locate Pfizer in the immediate area around the vehicle was a huge disappointment to the police. They followed a set of footprints leading onto the reservation but found no sign of Pfizer. A couple reported seeing a man resembling Pfizer walking along the nearby Young Road several days before the car was found, but they didn't report the sighting until after the vehicle was discovered. Lori Greenbeck, an acquaintance of the Pfizer family, mentioned that her husband had gone camping with Pfizer in the area where the truck was found shortly before April 10. She believed Fisher was familiar with the region and might have been scouting it out. The police had hoped that finding the car would quickly lead to his arrest, but as more time passed without any sign of him, the case grew colder. With the lack of new leads, the FBI eventually became involved, and in June 2001 Robert William Pfizer was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list as the 475th person ever to be placed on it. The police believed that the increased publicity from being on the list, along with the coverage on shows like America's Most Wanted and The Hunt with John Walsh, would lead to his capture. By April 2003 the FBI had received hundreds and hundreds of leads. However, all reported sightings of Pfizer have either been inconclusive or proven false. He's a survivalist, that he's out there living in the woods. To do that as an individual is usually a death card. Professional survival instructor Cody Lundine is as flunked as he is barefoot. You've come here to talk to me about, is it possible for this guy to live off the land for 20 years? And my short answer is hell no. For starters, investigators say there hasn't been any sign of someone living in the woods in 2009. A bizarre incident in Guatemala fueled speculation that Robert William Pfizer might still be alive. A couple of tourists were taking photographs when a Caucasian male who was aggressive and visibly upset approached them. He demanded that they delete any pictures in which he might have appeared in the background. His behavior was so erratic and forceful that it drew the attention of the local police. The man's reaction seemed highly unusual, and his demeanor and actions matched some of Fisher's known tendencies. The second and perhaps most well-known potential sighting of Pfizer occurred in 2004 in White Rock, which is a suburb of Vancouver, Canada. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrested a man who they suspected was Pfizer. The man had a missing tooth in the same spot where Fisher had a gold bicuspid, as well as a similar surgical scar on his back. Additionally, his age, height and weight were almost identical to Fisher's at the time. Having found all these similarities, the RCMP contacted American authorities, who then conducted a fingerprint analysis. I received a phone call from the Canadian police, who put me in touch with the person who ultimately became my client. He was in police custody. Contrary to what they believed, the results definitively proved that the man was not Robert William Pfizer. But even after the fingerprints cleared him, some of Fisher's former neighbors and people who knew him well were convinced that this man was indeed Fisher. His mother had to come forward with his birth certificate, family photographs and other personal documents to definitively prove his identity and eliminate him as a suspect. Despite this, some newspapers reported that Pfizer had been captured in Canada, which added unnecessary stress to the situation. Before Troy James Knapp, the notorious Utah cabin burglar, was identified and captured, many people speculated that he might be Robert William Pfizer. Knapp, who is known for living off the grid and ransacking remote cabins, fit the image of someone like Pfizer, who is believed to be capable of surviving in the wilderness. But this theory was also debunked when Knapp was conclusively identified as a different individual. In 2012, the FBI alerted local law enforcement that Fisher might have been living near where Mary's car was found. Then in October 2014, police raided a house in Commerce City, Colorado, after receiving a tip that Fisher was hiding there. Although they arrested 2 people, they found no sign of him. Another lead emerged in Commerce City, Colorado in October 2014. The tip seemed promising enough for the police to launch an operation, but unfortunately it did not lead to Pfizer. However, the investigation did result in the arrest of 2 other criminals that the police had been searching for. To this day, Robert William Pfizer remains at large and no confirmed sightings of him have surfaced, but there are a lot of theories about his whereabouts. Some believe he may have taken his own life in the Tonto National Forest, where his wife's car was found, possibly in one of the many caves in the area. However, investigators and profilers generally discount this theory, arguing that Fisher's personality, which was marked by arrogance and a strong sense of self-preservation, would make suicide an unlikely outcome. On the 15th anniversary of the murders in April 2016, FBI officials and Scottsdale police held a news conference where they displayed age-enhanced photos of Pfizer, hoping to reignite public interest in the case. On November 3, 2021, Pfizer was removed from the FBI's 10 most wanted list. He was replaced by Julian Udoni Arqueras, the alleged leader of MS-13 in Honduras and the 526th addition to the list. The FBI explained that despite the nearly 20 years of extensive publicity, Fisher's case had not resulted in his location or capture, meaning it no longer met the criteria for their list. But Fisher still remains a wanted fugitive. A lot of people think that he most likely survived and potentially started a new life under a fake identity. If this is the case, it is possible that Pfizer died after years as a fugitive without his remains being identified. Another theory suggests that he might have used his survival skills to continue living in the wilderness near Passon, Arizona, where his wife's car was discovered. But the police and survival experts are skeptical of this due to the difficulty of finding food and shelter in that environment and the lack of evidence of anyone living in those woods. He could be living in a small town where he gets paid cash and works as a handyman, said Detective John Heinzelman, or he could be in a big city and blend in, he gets paid cash, or he could be living in a big town, you get lost in the shuffle. Some suggest that Pfizer might have crossed the southern border of the United States. His disappearance occurred before the September 11 attacks, when border security was less stringent, which makes this a possible scenario. Police have speculated that Fisher may have started a new family, and they are concerned that he might eventually decide to leave and murder that family, as well as one of their main reasons for continuing the search despite ongoing efforts. Some law enforcement officials have concluded that they may never discover what happened to him. Maybe this is the best we have, knowing that he did it and never finding him again, said Detective Heinzelman. FBI agent Bob Caldwell described Fisher's personality as arrogant. He's cocky, he's a know-it-all and a loner. Fisher is known to chew tobacco, especially the Copenhagen brand. His appearance has been described as average, but he sometimes walks in an odd, erect manner with his chest out, likely due to a back injury he sustained while working as a firefighter. Fisher is an avid hunter and fisherman and is considered armed and extremely dangerous, with possible ties to Florida and New Mexico. Story 6. On December 18, 2013, a young woman named Brianna Warland was abruptly awakened by an unexpected phone call at 1:45 in the morning. She picked up the phone to find her best friend Heather on the other end, sobbing. Heather shared a recent conversation she had with Sydney. Her ex-lover Sydney had called her, revealing that he had split from his wife, expressing regret over their own breakup and asking Heather to start over again. Brianna, curious, asked why Heather even answered his call. It turned out that the number was unknown, prompting Heather to pick up after listening and slightly calming her friend down. Brianna insisted that Heather had only recently overcome the difficulties of their breakup and shouldn't get involved with Sydney again. She persuaded Heather to go back to sleep and rest, and they said their goodbyes. The picturesque Corry County in South Carolina is often considered an ideal place to live. This region is famous for its beautiful beaches, among which Myrtle Beach stands out for its beauty and popularity. Besides the beaches, one can enjoy dense forests, expansive rivers, and numerous friendly towns. On December 19, local police in High County discovered an abandoned car, a green Dodge Intrepid, parked in a secluded and remote area along the Waccamaw River. The area, known as Peachtree Landing, was about 8 miles from Myrtle Beach. The spot was used American Samoa dock for small boats and was at the end of a long, lesser-known road seldom traveled by cars. The police checked the car's registration in their system and found it was registered to Terry Elvis. Officers were dispatched to his residence when they knocked on his door and informed him about the found car. Terry was at home watching TV on his living room sofa. It turned out that the car belonged to his daughter Heather. Terry tried to contact Heather by phone, but she was unreachable. He agreed to accompany the police to Peachtree Landing to investigate further. Upon seeing his daughter's car in such a strange, secluded location, Terry was surprised, but initially not overly worried about his daughter. He assumed that the car might have been stolen, as it was odd that it was there without its owner. After receiving a spare key from Terry, the police opened the car and thoroughly inspected it. They found no personal belongings in the cabin, including Heather's purse, keys, or mobile phone. Terry's concern grew and he tried to contact Heather again. Still not receiving a response, he called the restaurant where she worked. The manager informed him that Heather hadn't shown up for work and was not scheduled until the next day. Realizing something was amiss, Terry informed the police of his concerns, stating that such behavior was completely out of character for his daughter and that something must have happened at the time. The car in the riverbank where it was found were not considered a crime scene, as there were no signs of a struggle, broken glass, or blood. Nevertheless, authorities decided To launch a missing person investigation, police and volunteers searched the land while divers explored the riverbed. During the search, human remains were found in the forest, but they were identified as belonging to an unknown man, not the missing woman. Investigators looking for any lead examined the background of the missing woman. 20-year-old Heather was the daughter of Terry and Debbie Elvis, who lived in the county. She had a close relationship with her parents and younger sister. Heather's father noted that their family had always been united and supportive of each other. Although Heather was independent, she remained close to her father, communicating with him daily by phone. In 2011, after graduating from St. James High School, Heather announced to her family that she wanted to move in with her best friend Brianna Whirlman. Her parents fully supported this decision. At 20, Heather worked as a waitress at the Tilted Kilt, a Scottish-themed restaurant in Myrtle Beach, and aspired to become a cosmetologist. Her younger sister Morgan shared that Heather's passions included makeup, working in front of the camera, and she was known for her creativity and ambition. Heather was also popular in her town for her kind, carefree, and positive nature. Her friend Brianna noted that when people remember and talk about her, they smile because she was always a bright personality. Another friend described Heather as sociable, freedom-loving, and life-enjoying. She always sought to live life to the fullest. In 2013, Heather had been living for a year with her best friend Brianna in Myrtle Beach. She was doing well in her studies and life seemed wonderful. However, everything changed when a chance encounter at the Tilted Kilt set Heather on a path leading to tragedy. On a warm June afternoon, Heather was working the day shift at a busy restaurant. While chatting with customers, taking orders, and carrying trays into the kitchen, she ran into 37-year-old Sydney Moore, a father of 3 and a handyman. Sydney had a small kitchen appliance repair business in Myrtle Beach, and he had gotten an order from the restaurant that day. They struck up a conversation, and Heather felt an instant attraction to the man. From that day on, their interactions became more frequent. They found that they shared many of the same interests and hobbies. Heather even hinted at her feelings on Twitter, writing that she was attracted to older men. By the end of July, Heather began posting intimate messages addressed to Sydney, who was renovating her restaurant. She also talked about Sydney to her friends and co-workers, revealing that he was the same guy from her Twitter posts. Sydney liked Heather's attention and began showing up at the restaurant regularly. They often entertained in the kitchen while Sydney worked on appliance repairs. By July, their relationship had probably evolved from innocent flirting to something more serious, as evidenced by 2 tweets Heather posted within a minute of each other. In one tweet she mentioned that she had done something, and in the other tweet she wrote that she was too deep to stop. Most of Heather's co-workers knew of her affection for 37-year-old Sydney and began gossiping about their affair. One co-worker later admitted that everyone knew about their relationship and disapproved of it because Sydney was a married man. Moreover, they often called Heather different names and once decided to play a joke on her. 2 colleagues called the restaurant pretending to be Tammy, Sydney's wife. In August, the rumors were finally confirmed. Sydney began to appear more often in the restaurant, constantly brought Heather coffee and sweets, sat in the dining area, or waited for her at the back door after her shift so they could leave together. The couple often shared details of their relationship with friends, and Sydney went so far as to tell acquaintances about his plans to hire Heather as a full-time nanny when he and his wife moved to Florida. Heather also told her friends about Sydney's plans, and everyone thought it was weird. The lovers were constantly on the phone and often traveled to remote and secluded places in their cars for close calls. It was obvious that this relationship was toxic to Heather. Sydney constantly assured her that he was tired, dissatisfied with his wife, and wanted to leave her, but apparently these were only empty promises. All of Heather's friends warned her that Sydney was just using her. By mid-September, Heather seemed to realize the situation she was in. On September 21, she tweeted, "Once an angel and a Demon fell in love, but it didn't lead to a good outcome. Perhaps that was the day she tried to break her strange bond with Sydney. The decisive moment came when 34-year-old Tammy, Sydney's wife of 34 years, finally found out about her husband's secret affair. She called Heather and began humiliating her over the phone. Brianna, Heather's roommate, witnessed the conversation and later told investigators that Heather endured the insults for a long time. At one point, Tammy claimed that Sydney was only using Heather for his fantasies and even had Sydney tell her personally over the phone. Sydney echoed his wife's words, telling Heather that she means nothing to him and is an easy target. Naturally, this emotionally shook the girl Sydney, and Tammy made her feel terrible and practically destroyed her identity. Prosecutor Chris Helms later determined that Tammy had been in a commanding position in the Mo household, dictating where and when Sydney should work and controlling all of his actions. Helms also noted that Tammy was furious at the betrayal and could not forgive Sydney and Heather, so she decided to ruin the young woman's life. After the truth was revealed, Tammy began handcuffing Sydney and tying him to the bed at night so he couldn't leave while she slept. She also changed the password on his phone and made him get a tattoo of her name on his stomach. Sydney agreed to all of this in hopes of saving his marriage and family. According to Brianna, Tammy's attacks did not stop at phone calls but escalated into systematic acts of hate. Tammy began making constant phone calls to Heather's work demanding that she be fired. She continued to call Heather from Sydney's phone and send pictures and videos of the two of them together, including during intimate encounters. Heather wrote Sydney a letter begging him to get Tammy to stop this harassment as it was causing problems at her job. Saddened and upset by the way the man she loved had treated her, Heather did everything she could to get her life back on track, even starting to attend church with her best friend. In early November, Tammy sent Heather new threatening messages, demanding that Heather give her address. Tammy warned that if Heather did not comply, she would find her anyway and the consequences would be severe. Tammy also stated that she had been watching Sydney since January 2012 and that Heather could no longer influence him. By this point, Heather was completely exhausted both physically and emotionally and couldn't understand why Tammy wouldn't leave her alone, especially since her relationship with Sydney was long over and she wanted to forget everything that had happened. Heather told her friend that Tammy seemed to be obsessed with her. By the end of November, more than 2 weeks after receiving Tammy's threatening messages, things finally began to calm down. Sydney and Tammy left for a 3-day trip to California with their 3 children in their new Ford FUV. With the Moa family out of town, Heather was finally able to relax and enjoy the moment, temporarily free from Tammy's threats. Heather also had a joyous event in her life. She was able to get her dream job at a beauty salon as a makeup artist. She was scheduled to start work before Christmas. Heather was thrilled and happily shared the news with all her friends and family. However, fears began to surface in her life that could only exacerbate her problems with Tammy. In early November, Heather and her co-workers at Tilted Kilt noticed that she had suddenly gained weight in a very short period of time. Heather became concerned and worried that she might be pregnant with Sydney's baby. Upset and scared, she decided to take a pregnancy test at the restaurant. Her manager Jessica Cook later told police that Heather was desperate about the whole situation and was afraid that Tammy might do something terrible to her. However, the test turned out to be faulty, and at that point Heather never found out whether or not she was pregnant with Sydney's child. Heather's best friend also mentioned that when she took a pregnancy test at work in early November, Heather had not been intimate with anyone other than Sydney. Despite worrying about a possible pregnancy in the winter of 2013, Heather was always optimistic. She decided it was time to move forward and make a fresh start. She hoped for a new, happier and healthier relationship and agreed to go on a first date with Steve Gerald, a man she had known briefly but was genuinely Attracted to. On the evening of December 17, Heather and Steve met around 10 p.m. and decided to drive around Myrtle Beach to admire the Christmas lights. A little later they decided to stop at a nearby parking lot where Steve taught Heather how to drive his manual transmission car. Excited, Heather sent her father a picture of herself behind the wheel of the car with the words, "I just learned to drive like a true professional." Steve later said they arranged a second date and he dropped Heather off at her Carolina Forest apartment around 1:15 a.m. Detectives had a hard time finding specific clues or leads, so they decided to put together a timeline of events that occurred before Heather's disappearance on December 17 and 18. The prime suspect was Steve Gerald, with whom Heather had spent the evening before her disappearance. However, after questioning, no evidence of his involvement was found and suspicions against him were dropped. Heather's family and friends were surprised that while they were doing their best to find the girl, reaching out to the public and offering a reward for information about her whereabouts, Tammy Mo at the same time became active on social media, continuing to insult Heather. This sparked outrage and drew the attention of investigators leading the investigation on December 20th after Brianna and her colleagues at the restaurant told police about the affair between Sydney and Heather. Detectives called Sydney in for questioning. Throughout the interrogation, Sydney was evasive and reserved, claiming that he was not near Peachtree Landing on the night of December 17, 18. He also claimed that he had no contact with Heather and was on a trip with his wife Tammy at the time. Detectives believed he was lying, but they needed proof. That's when investigators turned their attention to Heather's call history and phone records, and they were finally able to find the first clues by reconstructing Heather's movements on the day of her disappearance. They tried to determine Sydney's connection to these events. According to Brianna, on December 18, Heather received a call from an unknown number, a call that lasted only 5 minutes. After that, Heather repeatedly tried to call the number back. Starting at 1:35 a.m. she attempted to dial the number a total of 9 times, indicating her insistence on talking to someone she knew. Police were able to pinpoint the exact location where the call was made from. It was a payphone near a gas station in Myrtle Beach. Surveillance footage confirmed that an unknown male was entering the phone booth at the time Heather received the call. All of this evidence was presented to Sydney, who initially denied making the call but later admitted that he called Heather to ask her to leave him alone. Tammy Mo was also called in for questioning, where she spoke about her marriage and the situation but denied any involvement in Heather's disappearance. She also stated that Heather had led an inappropriate lifestyle and called her behavior abnormal. Tammy argued that the problem was not just infidelity but Heather's behavior in general. Based on these suspicions, detectives decided to check all the security cameras in the neighborhood and quickly uncovered evidence shortly before Heather's call. Sydney was captured on video buying a pregnancy test at a local supermarket. When asked who the test was for, the man said it was for his wife. Even more compelling evidence discovered later was footage from cameras installed along an isolated stretch of road leading to Peachtree Landing. These tapes showed a Ford F-150 very similar to Sydney's vehicle driving toward the location where Heather's car was found at 3:36 a.m. and then leaving the area about 10 minutes later. Experts later confirmed that the SUV captured on the footage was indeed Sydney's. He was the last person Heather spoke to, and according to investigators, the last person to see her at Peachtree Landing. Using Heather's phone records, investigators were able to reconstruct the timeline of her recent movements. At 2:30 a.m. Heather's phone attempted to call the payphone number Sydney was using, but there was no answer. She then headed to Longbeard's Bar and Grill in Carolina Forest, not far from her apartment. She stayed there for about 15 minutes and then headed toward Augusta Plantation Drive. She then returned to Longbeard's and stayed there for another 15 minutes. Heather tried calling Sydney again but got no answer and then went to her apartment where she stayed for 5 minutes at 3:25 a.m. Sydney's phone received another call which he answered and they talked for 4 minutes at 3:37 a.m. Heather's phone was at Peachtree Landing, from where she made 3 attempts to call Sydney but all went unanswered. The last attempt to call Sydney was made at 3:41 and by 3:42 the phone was disconnected. Security footage of Sydney's vehicle became incriminating evidence. However, even more compromising evidence was discovered in a search of the Moores' home conducted after investigators obtained a warrant. Suspiciously, the Moores got rid of their home video surveillance system on December 20 and installed a new one the next day. Although investigators were unable to access footage from the previous system, they seized recordings from the new one. The footage shows Sydney and Tammy Mo thoroughly wiping down the interior of their car and then burning the rags they used to clean it. All on the day the new surveillance system was installed in 2014, months after Heather Elvis disappeared. Police achieved a breakthrough in the case on February 21 of that year. It was announced that Sydney and Tammy Moore had been arrested on charges of kidnapping Heather. They were later charged with murder as well, even though Heather's body was never found. However, while in jail, the Moores refused to give any testimony. The police continued to search for Heather's body because without it they did not have enough evidence to bring the felony charges to trial. Eventually the murder charges were dropped, but the kidnapping charge remained. Heather's mother Debbie was disappointed that the charges were dropped but felt relieved that she would not have to attend the trial and hear the details of what may have happened to her daughter. Heather's family hoped it would encourage potential witnesses to testify. Ultimately, Sydney Moore's 5 months in custody were not the end of it. In 2017 he was found guilty of obstructing justice and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Following this, Sydney and Tammy were to stand trial for the kidnapping of Heather Elvis. The case generated immense public interest and received widespread media coverage in 2019. 6 years after Heather's disappearance, several lengthy court hearings took place where numerous witness testimonies, evidence and proof of the couple's involvement in the crime were presented. After 2 hours of deliberation, the jury made their decision and justice was served. Sydney and Tammy Moore were found guilty of kidnapping Heather Elvis. The court sentenced the Moores to 30 years of imprisonment each for their crime and the associated conspiracy. Both husband and wife will serve their terms concurrently. Following the verdict, Sydney requested to speak in the courtroom. Despite the conviction, he desperately continued to assert his innocence. He addressed Heather's parents with understanding and sympathy, stating that their daughter was a wonderful girl and he regretted the tragedy that befell her. Being a father himself, he acknowledged that he couldn't undo what had happened between him and Heather, but nothing could change now. Heather's parents gave an interview after the trial which was extremely difficult for them. They expressed hope that this wouldn't be the end and believed that someday Sydney and Tammy would reveal the truth about the crime. They described their daughter as a bright and sincere girl who suffered at the hands of the deceitful and cruel Moores. On Heather's birthday, her loved ones organized a campaign at the public park where her car was found. Residents of the area brought flowers and donations to the memorial site. The funds raised were directed to a center for missing persons as a tribute to Heather and a way to support her family in their quest to find their daughter and learn the truth. To this day, Heather Elvis's body remains unfound. Her family continues to post missing person announcements every year on her birthday, hoping to attract attention and keep her memory as well as that of others who have vanished alive. Debbie, Heather's mother, stated she could not find peace until she learns what happened to her daughter. She still hopes that her persistence will help uncover the truth and that someday someone will tell them what really happened to Heather. As the rain gently falls and the night grows deeper, thank you for joining me here at Mr. Nightcared True Crime. Stories remind us of life's mysteries and the importance of staying aware even as we seek comfort in the quiet of the night. Let the rain carry you to a peaceful sleep, and until we meet again, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night watch over you.